The Alpha King's pup spoke only one word for months. She was the first to hear the next. The first thing Sarah Calloway noticed when she stepped through the iron gate of the Voss estate was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that comes after a long day when the world finally settles and breathes out. This was a different sort entirely. It was the kind of silence that had been forced into a place and held there deliberately, like someone had pressed a hand over a wound and never let go. The trees along the front path were tall and very dark, their bare branches meeting overhead like a roof with no sky in it. The gravel beneath her feet was the only sound she made as she walked toward the front door, her bag over one shoulder, her contract folded in her coat pocket. She had read the file twice on the train ride up. She knew the basics. Boy, age 6. Name, Elias Voss. Non-verbal, following a period of acute grief. One word spoken consistently. No. 7 caregivers before her, all of them gone within weeks. And the notes they had left behind were careful, professional, and unsuccessful. She did not let any of that show on her face when the door opened. The man who answered was not what she had expected. She had built a version of him in her head during the long ride north, something cold and remote, the kind of man who kept his house this quiet because he preferred it that way, who had learned to live without softness and had decided softness was overrated. But Raiden Voss stood in the doorway, wearing a plain gray shirt and dark trousers, and he looked tired in the way that only years of carrying something very heavy can make a person look. He was tall, with dark hair gone slightly gray at the sides, and his eyes were the shade of deep water at the end of autumn. Not unkind, but careful. Everything about him was careful. His stillness was careful. His expression was careful. Even the way he stood in the doorway, taking up exactly the space he needed, and no more, was the careful posture of someone who had learned that precision was the only thing he could fully control. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a door they are not sure they want to open. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Mr. Voss," she said back. He stepped aside and let her in. The inside of the house was clean and ordered, but not cold. There were books on the shelves, real ones, worn ones, the kind people actually read and returned to, and marked with folded corners because they ran out of bookmarks. There was a coat hanging crookedly by the front door that she suspected belonged to the boy, because it was a child's size, and because everything else in the hallway was hung with precision, and this one thing was not. There were drawings pinned low on one wall, at child's eye height rather than adults, all done in red crayon, mostly birds, some of them very simple, but several were extraordinarily detailed for a 6-year-old. The feathers were individual lines. The wings had weight to them. She looked at them for long enough that Raiden noticed. "He draws," he said. "It's the main thing he does." "He's good," she said. She meant it without qualification. Something shifted in the man's face. It was small and quick, but she caught it, the way she caught most things. Not because she was looking for them, but because she was simply paying attention, which was the most useful skill she had ever developed. He had not expected a straightforward compliment. He had been prepared for questions, for professional assessments, for the particular brand of careful language that specialists and caregivers and well-meaning people used when they talked about a child like Elias. She had given him something simpler and plainer, and he did not know what to do with it. He showed her to her room on the 2nd floor, and then he showed her Elias's room, which was directly next door. The boy was not in it. His bed had been made with the kind of precision that did not belong to a 6-year-old. Someone else had made it, and made it carefully. His crayons were arranged on the desk in a row ordered by color. His books were stacked in a single neat pile. The room had the quality of a place that was maintained rather than lived in, and she thought about that for a moment without saying anything about it. "He's downstairs," Raiden said. "In the back room. He goes there in the mornings and most of the afternoon." She followed him down. The back room was a sitting room that faced the garden. The windows were tall and let in a gray October morning light. Elias Voss was sitting on the floor with a piece of paper and a red crayon, and he did not look up when they came in. He was small for his age, slight in the way of children who have been through something large, with dark hair like his father, and the same quality of careful attention, the same sense of a person who had learned, very young, that the world required watching. He was drawing a bird. She could see from where she stood that it was detailed. The feathers were individual lines, each placed with intention. Raiden crouched down beside his son. "Elias," "This is Sarah. She'll be staying with us." The boy did not look up. Sarah did not push. She did not crouch down. She did not say hello in the bright, encouraging voice that she had heard adults use with nonverbal children, and that never, in her experience, did anything except announce the adult's discomfort. She simply stood at the edge of the room, near the window, and looked out at the garden. There was a stone wall at the back, and beyond it a field going brown with autumn, and beyond the field the beginning of low hills. A single bird sat on the top of the stone wall, a sparrow, gray and perfectly still. She watched the bird. The boy drew. Raiden stood between them, looking like a man standing on a bridge over a river he could not swim, doing his best to look like this was not the situation. "I'll leave you to settle in," Raiden said, finally, to Sarah. Then, quieter, to no one in particular, or perhaps to both of them. "Lunch is at noon." He left. The room was quiet again. Elias kept drawing. Sarah kept watching the bird on the wall outside. Neither of them said anything for a long time, and it did not feel wrong. It did not feel like failure. It felt like a beginning that was not in a hurry. That was day one. She learned the house in small pieces over the first week. She learned that Raiden left for his home office before 7 each morning. It was at the far end of the ground floor, behind a door that was usually closed, and from it, she could sometimes hear his voice on calls, low and measured, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. She learned that Elias did not eat comfortably if someone was watching him too directly, that the observation needed to be peripheral, incidental, aimed elsewhere. She learned that the red crayons went faster than any other color, and she needed to keep a spare set in the kitchen drawer so the search never had to happen. She learned that the house had a cook named Mrs. Pryor, a quiet older woman who came 5 days a week and left meals ready in the refrigerator with small handwritten labels, who had apparently decided that Sarah was acceptable after 2 days of careful assessment, and expressed this by leaving an extra portion of everything without comment. She learned that there were pack members who came and went through the estate at odd hours, advisors, betas, men who stood in the hallway talking in low voices with Raiden, and left without raising their eyes toward the back room. She learned that no one in the household asked about Elias directly. They talked around him the way people talk around a bruise, carefully, with deliberate lightness, never pressing on the sore place. She learned that Raiden checked on his son 3 times a day, always from the doorway. He never entered the back room without some kind of invitation from the boy. Not words, there were no words, but some small shift of posture, some change in the angle of attention that signaled it was all right to come in. She observed this without letting Raiden know she was observing. It told her a great deal about the man. He was not distant because he was careless. He was not distant because he did not love his son. He was distant because he was genuinely afraid of doing the wrong thing, and in that fear, he had made himself very small, and very still, and very safe, and the boy had accepted this quiet version of his father, because it was the only version being offered. On the 5th day, she brought her sketchbook to the back room. She was not an artist in any trained sense, but she had always drawn, in the margins of notebooks since she was 12, on the backs of receipts, on paper bags when nothing else was available. She sat at the small table near the window and opened to a blank page and began sketching the garden, not looking at Elias, not performing anything for him, simply drawing because she wanted to, because the garden had an interesting quality of light in the mornings and she wanted to put it down somewhere. He looked up after about 10 minutes. She knew this because she could feel the quality of the room change. The particular way attention redirects itself, even silently, is something you learn to sense if you spend enough time with children who communicate without words. She kept drawing. She did not acknowledge that he had looked. He went back to his own page. But he had moved, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, so that his angle gave him a partial view of her sketchbook. She noticed this, and let something warm settle quietly in her chest, which she did not name and did not act on. She kept drawing. On the 7th day, he pushed his cup toward her when it was empty. Not toward Mrs. Pryor, who was closer, toward Sarah. She got up and filled it with water from the kitchen and set it back in front of him without comment. He drank. She sat back down. That was the whole of it. But Raiden had been in the hallway. He had seen it. She did not know this until later, when she caught the particular expression on his face when he thought no one was watching, something open and unguarded for just a moment, before he smoothed it away and walked on. The house administrator, a compact and precise woman named Gillian Howard, had told her during their initial meeting that the previous 7 caregivers had lasted between 4 days and 3 weeks. She delivered this information with the tone of someone trying to be kind about an outcome they expected to repeat. Elias can be difficult, she had said, not hostile, not unkind. He simply does not engage, and that wears people down over time. Sarah had said, which was not an agreement or a disagreement. Gillian Howard had looked at her with mild confusion, apparently waiting for more. Sarah had smiled and said nothing else, because the thing no one seemed to understand, not the administrator, not the previous caregivers, not the specialists whose reports she had read, not even Raiden Voss himself, was that Elias was not refusing to engage. He was waiting. There was a significant difference between those two things, and it was not a subtle one. A child who refuses to engage builds walls. A child who waits builds nothing at all. He simply stands in an open field and watches the sky, wondering if anything is going to come toward him that will not hurt. She was not going to be the thing that hurt him. That was the only rule she had carried into this house. Everything else, she would work out as she went. By the end of the first week, she had a morning routine. She was up before Elias, and she had his breakfast ready when he came downstairs. Always the same things in the same order, because she had learned from the file, and confirmed by watching, that he liked the mornings to be the same. Oatmeal, thin, no sugar, a glass of water, a piece of toast cut in rectangles, not triangles. She had no idea what the history of the rectangles was, and she did not ask. She just cut the toast the right way. She sat at the other end of the table with her own breakfast and her book, and they ate in a silence that was different from the silence she had felt in the house when she arrived. This silence had something inside it. It had 2 people, and the space between them was comfortable rather than empty. Raiden came down on the 8th morning while they were eating. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the scene. His son eating, the woman at the other end of the table with a book, the ordinary quiet of a morning that was not strained or broken, and she watched his throat move as he swallowed. "Good morning," Sarah said, without looking up. "Morning," Raiden said. His voice was slightly rougher than usual. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter, instead of taking it back to his office. Elias did not look up from his toast. But he did not leave either, which he had done on several previous mornings when Raiden came in. He finished his oatmeal and his toast and carried his bowl to the counter. Not to the spot near the sink where Mrs. Pryor usually placed things, but to the spot right next to where Raiden was standing. He set the bowl there, beside his father's coffee cup. Then he turned and went back to the back room. Neither adult spoke for a moment. "He's never done that," Raiden said. His voice was very quiet. "Done what?" Sarah looked up from her book. "Brought his dishes back." She looked at him for a moment and nodded once, and looked back at her page. She heard him set his cup down. She heard the pause. Then she heard him pick it up again and take a long drink, and stay at the counter for a while, before he finally went back to his office. On the 10th day, a cold front came down from the north, and the temperature dropped sharply overnight. She went to the back room with a warmer sweater for Elias, and found him standing at the window with his palms flat against the glass, watching the field beyond the stone wall. The grass was bent sideways in the wind. The sky was the color of old iron. She stood beside him and looked out at the same thing. "Cold day," she said, simply, without expectation. He said nothing, but he turned his head, just slightly, to look at her face. She kept her eyes on the field. He turned back to the window. She set the sweater on the arm of the nearest chair and left the room. 5 minutes later she heard small footsteps, and when she glanced around the doorframe, the sweater was gone. That night, after Elias was in bed and the house had gone still, she was in the kitchen making tea when Raiden came downstairs. He looked like someone who had been working for too many hours. Something compressed and tired around his eyes, his sleeves rolled up. He poured water and stood at the counter, and she waited, because she had a feeling he wanted to say something, and was deciding how. "How do you know," he said, after a while, "when to push and when to wait?" She thought about it honestly before she answered. "I don't push," she said. "I just try to be worth waiting for." He looked at her across the kitchen. She looked back. The kettle clicked off. She poured her tea and said goodnight and walked to the door, and she felt his eyes on her all the way, a steady and careful attention that stayed with her even after she had gone upstairs and closed her door. She did not make anything of it. But she did not pretend she had not felt it. She was honest with herself about things, and the honest thing was that it had felt like something. The second week began with a change she could feel without being able to name precisely. The house was the same, the routine was the same, but something in the quality of the quiet had shifted, the way a sky changes before weather arrives. Not raining yet, but no longer the same sky it was before. Elias had begun leaving his drawings in places where she would find them. Not presented to her, not handed over with visible expectation, just left, on the kitchen table, on the arm of the chair in the back room, once, on the bottom step of the stairs where she could not miss it. Always birds, always red. She collected them carefully, and kept them in a folder in her room. She did not show Raiden. This felt important. The drawings were between her and Elias, and she sensed that widening that circle before the boy had decided he was ready would break something that was only just beginning to hold. She had learned this. In 3 years of working with children who had been through large and hard things, trust was built in very small rooms. You did not throw the doors open. You waited until the child opened them, and you stepped through quietly, and you stayed. On the 14th day, Elias pushed a red crayon across the kitchen table to her. Not a drawing, the crayon itself. She picked it up and used it to write her grocery list. He watched her the entire time without appearing to. When she finished, she set it back in front of him. He picked it up and put it with the rest. Small negotiations, tiny acts of shared language, a whole conversation made entirely of things that were not words. She found herself thinking, in the quiet spaces between tasks, about how the best things always started this way, not with announcements or decisions made out loud, with a cup pushed across a table, with a sweater left on a chair arm, with someone deciding, slowly and privately and without making a performance of it, that another person could be trusted. She thought, when she was being completely honest with herself, that some of what she was observing applied to Raiden too. She was careful about how much space she allowed that thought. He was her employer. His son was her responsibility. That was the shape of things, and she intended to hold it. But it was harder to hold when he stood in the kitchen doorway, a little longer than he needed to, or when he said her name, with the carefulness of someone who had thought about it before doing so. She held on to the shape of things anyway. She was good at holding things. She had learned to be. But the house was getting warmer, even in the deepening cold of October, and she was not imagining that. On the 15th day, she brought her sketchbook to the back room and drew, while Elias drew. They sat on opposite sides of the room, and neither spoke, and both worked. Outside the window, the wind moved through bare branches, and the light was thin and silver. At some point, she looked up and found him looking at her page. She turned the sketchbook slowly, so he could see it better. He looked at her drawing of the garden and the stone wall and the gray field beyond it for a long moment. Then he looked back at his own page, and added something she had not seen him do before. He gave the bird he was drawing a shadow, a small dark shape on the ground beneath the wings, as if the bird was real enough to block the light. She did not say anything about the shadow, she just kept drawing. Outside the window, on the top of the garden gate, a sparrow had landed, gray and absolutely still, its head slightly turned, as if it too was paying attention to something it could not yet name. The third week arrived the way some weeks do, not with a clear beginning, but with a slow accumulation of small moments that only made sense when you looked back at them from the other side. Sarah had stopped counting the days. Counting was measuring, and she had decided early on that measuring Elias was the wrong approach entirely. He was not a project with a timeline. He was a child who had been hurt in a quiet and permanent way, and he was deciding in his own time whether the world still held anything safe. She could not rush that process. She could only remain available to it. She stayed. The drawings arrived every day now. She found one on her pillow one afternoon, a bird with very careful wings, each individual feather rendered in lines so precise and so delicate that she sat on the edge of her bed for a while just holding it before she added it to the folder. The folder in her room was getting thick. She still had not shown Raiden. The drawings were a private language between her and Elias, and she intended to let that language grow in private until it was strong enough to be shared. She had begun to understand things about the house that the file had not contained. She understood that it had been a different house before. She could not have said how she knew this. There were no photographs anywhere, which was itself a kind of information. Or it might have been the particular quality of the rooms, the way they felt like spaces that had been reorganized after something significant was removed from them. The furniture was good and solid and clearly cared for, but some of it stood at angles that suggested it had been moved and never moved back. The kitchen shelves had one section that was conspicuously empty and clean, the cleanness of absence rather than intention. She did not ask. It was not her story to ask about, but she felt the shape of it, the way you feel the shape of a room even in the dark. Raiden carried it with him everywhere. She could see this more clearly now, 3 weeks in, than she had been able to see it at the beginning. In the early days, she had read him as simply tired, but she had come to understand that tiredness was only the outermost layer. What he carried underneath was older and much heavier, a specific kind of grief that comes not just from losing someone, but from being required to continue functioning at the same high level of responsibility while the loss is still completely fresh. He had not been given time to stop. He had lost his wife and then had to immediately continue being the Alpha King and a father and the center of an entire network of people and obligations, all at once. And somewhere in the going on, he had learned to maintain such thorough control of himself that the control had become the only visible thing. Except sometimes, in doorways. Except in the moments when he looked at his son and believed no one else was looking. She was always looking. Not in a way that felt like intrusion, she was simply attentive, because attentiveness was the thing she was best at, and the thing that had served her in every difficult situation she had ever been placed in. On the 16th day, Elias said, "No," for the first time since her arrival. She had asked him gently whether he wanted to go outside, and he had not looked up from his drawing, and he had said no, clearly, firmly. She said, "Okay," and stayed inside with him. And she felt something she had not anticipated. Relief, because no was a word, a complete and deliberate communication. He had chosen to use it with her, which meant he believed she would honor it, that she would not push past it, that it would be heard and respected when he said it. She had accepted it cleanly and without fuss, and the silence afterward had a different quality, more at ease, slightly warmer, the specific ease of a space where a limit has been stated and the other person has held it. She told Raiden that evening. She explained what had happened and what she believed it meant. He listened with his hands around his coffee cup and his eyes on the table, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The others would have kept trying, he said, or made a thing of it. Yes, she said. He looked up. How do you know that? They wrote it in their notes. They logged it as a failure every time he said it. Was it? No, she said. It was him making a choice and being heard. That is not a failure. That is the beginning of trust. He was quiet again. Then, no, it wasn't a failure. She nodded and got up to rinse her cup. She could feel him watching her as she moved, and she let him, because she thought he needed to sit with something that needed a little space, and she was not going to make it strange by acknowledging it out loud. On the 18th day, Elias came to find her. She was in her room in the afternoon, reading, when she heard footsteps in the hallway, and then a pause outside her door. She waited. The footsteps did not retreat. After a moment she got up and opened the door. He was standing in the hallway holding a piece of paper. He looked up at her. His eyes were very dark and very serious and completely clear. No confusion, no anxiety, no uncertainty about whether he should be there. He had come with purpose. He held the paper out toward her. It was a drawing of a woman. Very simple. A figure sitting at a table with a book. The figure had long hair, rendered in careful lines. The table was the kitchen table. She recognized it by the particular angle of the legs, the shape she had apparently registered without meaning to. He had drawn her from memory, and from careful observation, and he had given the figure an expression, just a few simple lines, but they made the face look calm, at rest, like someone who was exactly where they meant to be. She took the drawing. She held it for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "I'm going to keep this one." He looked at her for another moment, then turned and walked back down the hallway to his room. She stood in her doorway holding the drawing, and let the full weight of what had just happened settle into her. It did not look like a turning point from the outside. It looked like a 6-year-old handing a piece of paper to a grown-up in a hallway, but she had been doing this work long enough to know what it was. He had come to her. He had chosen to. He had made her real by drawing her, had seen her, set her down on paper, and carried the paper to show her. That was not a small thing dressed in ordinary clothes. That was an enormous thing, quietly done. She added the drawing to the folder. It went on top. Raiden found the folder 3 days later, not because he had been looking for it, but because she had set it on the kitchen counter while reorganizing her room, and he came in before she could put it away. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Can I?" he said. "Yes," she said. He opened it. He went through the drawings slowly, one at a time, in silence. She watched. Without making it obvious she was watching. His hands were careful. He held each drawing at its edges, as if they could be damaged by too firm a grip. When he reached the drawing of the woman at the table, the one on top, he stopped for longer than he had at any of the others. He knew the kitchen table. He knew the long hair, the specific quality of stillness in how the figure was sitting. "He drew you," he said. "Yes." He's never drawn a person before. He said it quietly, without accusation, but she could hear the weight underneath it. "I know," she said. He set the drawing back on top and closed the folder and placed it exactly where he had found it. He picked up his coffee and walked toward the door. He stopped with his back to her. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Yes. Thank you. Just that. Just 2 plain words." He walked out. She stood in the kitchen after he left. She was very deliberate about picking up the folder and returning to her room. Very deliberate about every step. But her hands were not quite steady, and she acknowledged that to herself honestly. And then she set it aside, because the shape of things still held, and she intended to hold it. That evening, for the first time, Elias brought his drawing things to the kitchen table rather than the back room. He spread his paper and crayons at the table and drew, while Raiden read nearby, and Sarah sat at the far end with her book, and the 3 of them were in the kitchen together in the lamplight, with the wind outside the windows, and it looked, from the inside, which was the only place that mattered, like what a home is supposed to look like. She was very careful not to name what she felt, but the warmth in the room was real. The next morning, Elias came downstairs before she had finished making breakfast. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a moment. "Cold," he said. She blinked once, keeping everything controlled. "Yes," she said. "Cold morning." He nodded once, decisively, and came in and sat at the table and waited for his oatmeal. She turned back to the stove. She breathed in, slowly. She breathed out. That was the second word, and it was not no, which was important. Cold was something chosen from observation. He had looked at the morning and decided to describe it to her. He had used language to share something with another person, which was not the same as using language to protect himself from one. The difference between those 2 things was the difference between walls and bridges, and he had just built the beginning of something that faced outward. When Raiden came downstairs 20 minutes later, she met his eyes and said, quietly, "He said a second word this morning." Raiden set his hand flat on the counter. "Cold," she told him. He looked at the morning and said it was cold. Raiden did not speak. He picked up his coffee and walked to the window and stood looking out at the gray November morning. She watched him. His shoulders moved once, a single slow and controlled breath. When he turned back, his face was composed, but his eyes were different, bright in a way that had nothing to do with the light in the room. "Cold," he said, very quietly, like he was trying the word out, like he wanted to feel what it felt like in his mouth, the thing his son had chosen to say. Outside the window, the sparrow was on the garden gate, gray and small and absolutely still, in the cold October air, waiting with the patient certainty of something that knew exactly where it was supposed to be. She had been in houses before where silence was a choice, where a family had decided, together or separately, that quiet was preferable to noise, that the business of living could be conducted in a low register without loss. This was not that kind of silence. This was a silence that had been installed under pressure, the way a bone sets wrong after a break, functional, present, but shaped by the injury rather than by intention. She thought about this during a quiet afternoon in the second week, sitting in the back room while Elias drew. She had been thinking about it since the first morning, actually, about the specific way the household was quiet, about the way every person in it, including Raiden, moved through the space, as if they were being careful not to disturb something that was already disturbed. as if the grief had become a physical presence in the rooms, something that could be bumped into, and everyone was going around it. She had worked with grief before. She had worked with children who had lost parents, with families who had come apart and been imperfectly reassembled. She knew that grief was not fixed by being avoided, and that presence, simple, patient, reliable presence, was the only thing that actually helped. Not fixing, not solving, not having the right words, just being there. She was there. On the 16th morning, she made Elias's toast and cut it in rectangles and set it in front of him, and he picked up a piece and ate it, and then picked up another and set it down again and looked at it and said, "Cold." She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the toast. "Your toast?" she asked. He shook his head, very slightly. He looked toward the window. Outside, the October morning was steel gray, and the trees were moving in the wind. "Cold," he said again, not asking, telling. "Yes," she said, "cold morning." He ate the toast. She did not tell Raiden immediately. She waited until after dinner, when the house was quiet, and Elias was in bed, and the evening had settled into itself. And then she found him in his study, and told him. He set down what he was reading. He looked at her. "He used it twice," she said. "Once for the toast, and then once for the morning." He was making a distinction. He was using the word with awareness of what it meant. Raiden said nothing for a moment. "That's more than I thought," he said finally. "Yes," she said, "it is." She went back to the kitchen and made herself a final cup of tea and stood at the window with it, looking out at the dark garden and the stone wall and the gate. The sparrow was not there now. It was night, and sparrows slept in the dark like everyone else. But it would be back in the morning. She had started to count on that. The drawings continued to accumulate in her folder. By the end of the second week she had 11 of them, each bird slightly different from the last, each one placed somewhere she would find it with the quiet intention of a child who wanted someone to have a thing without wanting to make a statement about wanting them to have it. She thought about what it meant, about the specific kind of trust it required to leave something somewhere for someone without being there to see whether it was received. It required believing that the someone would receive it well, that they would not misuse the vulnerability of the leaving. She received every drawing carefully. She kept every one. On the last morning of the second week, a Saturday, she brought 2 cups of tea to the back room and set one near Elias without comment, because he usually had water, but it was cold, and tea was warmer, and she thought he might like it. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. Then he picked it up with both hands. It was a large cup for a small child, and drank from it and set it down. He did not say anything, but he looked at her once more, briefly, before he went back to drawing. A direct and serious look that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and then was over. She thought about that look for the rest of the morning. She thought about what was in it, about the specific quality of the attention, about the thing it said that his one word could not yet say. It said, "You are here, and I notice, and it matters." That was all, and it was enormous. The cold held through the last days of October. It settled into the stone walls of the house and stayed there, the patient cold of the Northern Territories that did not rush and did not apologize. Sarah had started sleeping with an extra blanket. Elias had started wearing the heavy gray sweater she had found in the back of his closet. It was slightly too large for him, with worn-down cuffs that suggested it had been loved a great deal by someone before him. She had not asked whose it had been. She was practiced at not asking about the things that had edges. The third word came on a Wednesday. She had been in the kitchen, and Elias came in the way he had recently started to, without a specific purpose, simply appearing and being present, which was its own kind of progress, quiet and unmistakable. He stood near the counter and watched her cut an apple into slices. She set half of them on a small plate and pushed it toward him without comment. He took one slice. He ate it standing there. Then he looked at the plate, looked at her, and said, "More." She put more apple on the plate. He took 2 more slices and walked out. She stayed very still for a moment, hands on the cutting board. More. He had asked for something. He had used a word to ask. He had used language as a bridge between what he wanted and another person who could provide it. That was not the same as no, which was a wall, and it was not quite the same as cold, which was an observation shared, but not directed. More was a request. It required him to trust that she would respond, that the word would do what it was supposed to do, that language between two people could actually function the way it was meant to. She told Raiden that evening. He listened carefully. 3 words, he said. No. Cold. More. Yes. What does the order tell you? She had thought about this. He started with protection, she said, with the word that kept the world at a safe distance. Then he moved to observation, naming something he saw. Then to request, asking for something he wanted. That is the direction, away from defense and toward connection. He looked at his glass for a long moment. You think about this very carefully. It's what I'm here for. No, he said. The others were here too. You're doing something different. She did not deflect that. She received it as what it was. There were things happening in the pack that week that kept Raiden occupied in ways that went past his usual carefully maintained boundaries. She heard him on calls late in the evenings, his voice coming through the floor of her room, not the words, just the register, low and even and carrying weight. She did not know the details of how the Ironmore pack functioned, and had not asked, but she was aware that his position was not a ceremonial one. People depended on him daily, in ways that were practical and not optional. He carried that in how he moved through the house, in the steadiness of his voice even when he was clearly exhausted, in the way he always had time when something required his time. She was beginning to understand what that cost him. The steadiness, the control, the daily management of his grief, so that everything he was responsible for did not collapse under the weight of it. He had made himself into something very reliable and very constant, and she thought that somewhere in the process of doing that, he had stopped being able to feel the difference between the person he was and the function he was performing. Or perhaps he remembered the difference and simply had nowhere safe to put that knowledge. She thought about this one afternoon at the window while Elias was drawing. She thought about it carefully and honestly. She was not in any danger of misunderstanding the situation. She knew exactly what she was there for and what she was not there for, and she held that distinction carefully. Then she remembered the way he had said her name in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, the deliberateness of it, the pause before it. She turned away from the window and opened her sketchbook and drew the garden very carefully for the next half hour. The elder arrived on a Friday afternoon in a large dark car with 2 men who stood slightly behind him in the way that indicated function rather than company. She kept Elias in the back room. They drew together and she let the hour pass without making it significant. She heard the elder leave. She heard the particular quiet that followed. She waited 20 minutes and then went to the kitchen, made 2 cups of tea, and carried one to Raiden's office. She knocked once. "What?" he said, flat, not a question. She opened the door. He was at the window with his back to the room. She set the tea on his desk. She looked at his back for a moment. Then she left. She was at the end of the hallway when he said, "Miss Calloway." She turned. He was in the doorway. He looked older than he had an hour ago, not in any visible way she could specifically point to, but in the quality of how he was standing. "What did he say?" she asked, because she thought he needed someone to simply ask. "That my son needs a mother figure," he said. "That a boy raised without one develops difficulties." She held his gaze. "Elias," she said, "has gone from 1 word to 3 in less than 3 weeks. He draws every day. He eats well. He sleeps through the night. He has started coming to the kitchen on his own. He asked for more apple this week using a complete word. He left a drawing on my pillow because he wanted me to have it." She paused. "Your son is not developing difficulties. Your son is working harder than most adults ever have to, in the only way available to him right now. Anyone who looks at that and sees a problem is not paying attention to the right things." Raiden looked at her for a long time. "He doesn't know Elias," he said. "No, he doesn't." She said goodnight and went to the kitchen and sat at the table and held her cup and thought about the look that had been on Raiden's face in the office doorway. Not the tired look, not the controlled one, but something underneath both of those. The look of a person who has been given something they did not know they needed until the moment they received it. She held on to the shape of things. She was going to keep holding it. But the shape was changing, slowly, in the way things change when the ground beneath them has shifted. And she knew it. She knew it honestly and quietly and completely. In the morning, Elias was already at the table when she came downstairs, drawing. He looked up the moment she came through the door, immediate, natural, automatic. It had been weeks since he did that. He looked at the window. He looked at her. "Morning," he said. 4 words now. The fourth was a greeting. He had offered it to her. The way you offer something to a person who is part of your daily life, because they are, and because mornings are things you share with people who matter. She said good morning back and put the kettle on, and the kitchen filled with the small sound of water beginning to warm, and outside on the garden gate, the sparrow sat in the pale light, its eyes open, its wings folded close, missing absolutely nothing. She found, in the 3rd week, that she had stopped being surprised by Elias. She had been surprised in the first days by the depth of his silence, by the quality of his attention, by the specific things he chose to communicate non-verbally, and the specific things he chose not to. She had been surprised, in the way you are pleasantly surprised by something you had hoped for but not expected, by the drawings. She had been surprised by the cup pushed toward her, by the sweater gone from the chair arm, by the way he had moved slightly so she could see her drawing from where he was sitting. But now she was no longer surprised. Now she simply noticed, and noted, and understood, or tried to understand, and moved forward with whatever she had understood. This was the work. The slow and patient accumulation of understanding. It was the only work that mattered in a situation like this one, and she was good at it. She had also, in the 3rd week, stopped being surprised by Raiden. She had been surprised by him in the beginning, by the depth of the tiredness in him, by the carefulness, by the way he loved his son in such total silence, standing in doorways and filling up the absence of words with pure, consistent presence. She had been surprised, in those early days, by the moments when the surface cracked slightly and something else was visible underneath, something warm and human and much larger than the composed man in the gray shirt. She was not surprised by him now either. She had come to know the shape of him well enough to predict the movements of his attention, to understand which things would land and how. She had come to know that he listened to everything she said about Elias with his whole focus, that he thought about her words after she said them, that he was the kind of person who turned a new idea over several times before deciding what he thought about it and what to do with it. She had come to know that he was funnier than he appeared, dry and quiet about it, never performing for an audience, but genuinely funny, in the specific way of someone who notices incongruity and chooses to name it. She knew the shape of him, and she was very careful about what she did with that knowledge. The 4th word came on a Thursday morning. He said it when she came downstairs, standing at the kitchen doorway in his pajamas and his sweater, and he said it the way you say a greeting, addressed to her specifically, offered to her, placed in the air between them as a gift of sorts. Good morning, condensed into one word. All the social and human meaning of a morning greeting contained in the single syllable. She said good morning back, and the morning began. She told Raiden that evening. He said morning, back to her softly, the same way he had said cold, trying it out, hearing it, feeling what it was like to say the thing his son had said. 4 words, he said. Yes. He was quiet. Do you think he would? If I said good morning to him first, do you think he would? Try it, she said. He did, the next morning. He came downstairs and said, good morning, Elias, in a voice that was careful, but not stiff, and Elias looked up from his oatmeal and said, morning back. Just that. One word, but clearly addressed to his father, clearly a response, not just a sound. Raiden said nothing else. He poured his coffee and sat at the table. But his hand on the coffee cup was not entirely steady, and she looked at her book, and neither of them spoke, and it was entirely the right way to handle a moment that was too large and too real to be talked about. The days were shorter now, the darkness coming earlier, the light in the mornings thinner and colder. She had started lighting the lamp in the back room by 2 in the afternoon, and the warmth of it against the early dark had a quality she had not expected, something that felt like protection, like the circle of light was a kind of argument against the cold and the dark beyond it. Elias drew every day. The birds were getting more varied now, different poses, different species, she thought, though she was not a naturalist and could not be certain. Some of them had backgrounds now, a field, a wall, a patch of sky. He was adding context to the birds, placing them in the world. She thought this was significant. She thought it was him practicing the idea that a thing did not exist in isolation, that a bird in the world was different from a bird on a white page, that context mattered. She added this observation to the careful internal record she kept of everything she noticed. She did not write any of it down. Her records were in her head, organized and accessible, the product of 3 years of paying very close attention to very small things. She went over them sometimes in the evenings, in the quiet after Elias was in bed, reviewing what she had noticed, and what she thought it meant, and what it suggested she should do next. Usually what it suggested she should do next was, nothing. Continue. Be here. Wait. This had turned out to be right. The fourth word arrived on a Thursday morning when the world outside was entirely gray, the clouds low and close, and the light thin as paper. She was at the stove when she heard him on the stairs. His footsteps, which she had learned to distinguish from Raiden's by now, lighter and more deliberate. The steps of a person who was still in the process of deciding whether each floor was trustworthy. He came through the door in his pajamas and his sweater, and he stood in the kitchen and looked at her and said, "Morning." Just that. One word, but it was placed in the air between them with the intentionality of a greeting, directed at her specifically, offered to her, and not to the room. Good morning compressed to its single most essential syllable, and given. She said good morning back, and she turned back to the stove, and Elias came to the table and sat down, and the morning began. When Raiden came downstairs half an hour later, she told him. He stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to the word, and then he went and poured his coffee, and sat at the table, and she could see him thinking about it from across the room, turning it over, understanding it. Morning, he said, to Elias. Not with any particular emphasis, just using it, returning it. Elias looked up from his drawing. He had brought it to the kitchen table that morning, the first time he had done that, and he said morning back, one deliberate word, and looked back at his page. Raiden looked at the table. He looked at his coffee. She looked at her book. None of them said anything else, and it was the right kind of nothing. The days settled into December, and the cold settled into the house, and the light kept retreating, a little earlier each afternoon, and she kept the lamp on from 2 o'clock, and the kitchen was always warm, and every morning Elias said, "Morning," when he came downstairs, to her, and then to Raiden when he arrived, and every morning, it landed somewhere in the chest of at least one person in the room, and they kept their faces appropriate about it. She thought, in those December mornings, about how language built itself in layers, how the first word was protection, and the second was observation, and the third was need, and the fourth was belonging. Morning, I am here, you are here. This is the start of the day, and I am giving it to you, which means I trust that you will be here when the day begins. She was always here when the day began. She intended to keep being here. She had decided that a long time ago, on the train ride up from the south with the file in her bag and the particular kind of silence waiting for her at the end of the journey. She had decided before she had met him. She just hadn't known yet what she was deciding. Raiden Voss was not a man who avoided things. He had spent nearly 2 years facing everything directly, because there had not been another option. When his wife died, he had stood in front of his pack and spoken. When the grief came in the nights, and it came, reliably, in waves that had no patience for the composed man he was by daylight, he had sat with it alone in the dark until it ran through him. When Elias stopped speaking, he had read every document, consulted every specialist, tried every structured approach that was recommended to him, and when none of it worked, he had simply continued to show up anyway, standing in doorways, checking in, refusing to stop even when showing up produced nothing visible. He was not a man who looked away from hard things, and yet, in the 4th week of Sarah Calloway being in his house, he caught himself doing exactly that. He was avoiding her. Or more precisely, he was looking at her very deliberately, and then finding reasons to be somewhere else. Getting up earlier so the kitchen was behind him before she came down. Scheduling calls to coincide with the hours she and Elias were most likely to be together in the sitting room. Eating lunch at his desk and telling himself it was efficiency. He was very thorough in his self-deception, and he knew it was self-deception, which was what made it uncomfortable. He was aware, with the clarity that had always made him a capable leader and an unreliable liar to himself, that his workload was not the reason. The reason was what she had said about being worth waiting for, and what it had done to him. The reason was the folder of drawings, and the one on top that Elias had drawn and carried to her room. The reason was the way she had stood in his office doorway after the elder left and told him, plainly, what his son was doing and why it mattered. The reason was that she had been in his house for 4 weeks, and it was a warmer house, and he had not been prepared for what it would feel like to notice that, or for what noticing it would do. He was not ready for it. He was possibly not capable of it. He had loved his wife with the kind of complete, wholehearted certainty that leaves no space for imagining anything else. And when she died, he had not thought about love as something with a future. He had thought of the space she left as a permanent feature of his life, something you learn to navigate, not to change. And then Sarah Calloway had come into his house and sat quietly in the back room with his son, and filled a cup without being asked, and said things in his kitchen that no one had said to him in 2 years, and he was sitting at his desk in the middle of a November morning, staring at a document he had read 3 times, without registering a word. He closed the document. He went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the room. The folder of drawings was gone. She had taken it back upstairs. The kitchen was clean and quiet. The covered bowl of apple was in the refrigerator. The spare red crayons were in the drawer, organized. He stood there for a while. Then he went back to his desk and reopened the document and read it properly this time. His beta Corden came to the house on Tuesday. 11 years they had worked together, long enough for Corden to know when to speak and when to allow a silence to do its work, and he was very good at the latter. He arrived with papers that needed signatures and stayed for lunch at the kitchen table, because the dining room felt too large for 2 people, and neither of them used it anymore. Sarah was out with Elias. She had taken him for a walk along the field path behind the estate, the first time he had agreed to go outside voluntarily in months. Raiden had watched them leave from his office window, Sarah in her gray coat, Elias beside her in the heavy sweater, not holding hands but walking close, occasionally stopping, when Elias stopped to look at something. He watched until they went around the wall and out of sight. Corden had noticed. He noticed everything, which was part of what made him useful and occasionally inconvenient. "She's been here just over a month," Corden said, "over soup." "Almost," Raiden said. "The boy went outside today." "Yes." "He hasn't done that voluntarily since February." "I know." Corden ate his soup. He could let a silence function for a considerable length of time, when he chose to. "She's good," Raiden said, eventually. Meaning Sarah. "She seems it. She explains things. Not just what Elias does, what it means, what it tells you about where he is, where he's coming from, what he needs next. She thinks about the context of each thing." He paused. "No one has done that before." "No," Corden said. "I don't believe anyone did." Raiden ate his soup. He was aware, very precisely, that he had just described the quality in Sarah Calloway that he found most. He set the thought down and kept eating, and did not finish the sentence even in his own head. Some things needed more time than a Tuesday lunch. Corden said, as they were finishing, "There's something about the Eastern Territory situation I should brief you on," and they went back to pack business, which required actual attention and was therefore a relief, and they worked through the afternoon, and Corden left, and Raiden sat at his desk in the early evening quiet. He heard them return, heard Elias's quicker footsteps on the gravel, the rhythm of a child still thinking about something exciting from the walk, heard Sarah's quieter steps behind, heard the front door, heard the house accept them back into itself. That evening, Sarah came to find him to report on the walk. Elias had gone 45 minutes. He had walked to the far end of the field path. He had crouched down and touched the frost on the grass with one finger, and held very still for a long moment, thinking about what he was feeling. He had watched a bird flying overhead, and said, "Bird," not as a request, not as a question, but as a naming, an identification, the word placed next to the thing it belonged to. Raiden stood at his desk and listened to all of this. He was watching her face while she spoke. She was happy, not professionally satisfied, not relieved that an outcome had been achieved. Genuinely, quietly happy about a child and a frost-covered field and a single word, said to a bird in the sky. The happiness was in her eyes, and in the way she was standing, and in the specific quality of her voice, which was different from her usual careful steadiness. He had not paid attention to what happiness looked like on another person's face in a long time. Not because happiness had been absent from his life. There had been small things, Elias's drawings, good work, Corden's occasional dry humor, but the capacity to notice that quality in another person, To really see it and let it arrive somewhere in him. That had been very quiet for a very long time. "Thank you," he said, when she finished. He meant considerably more than the report. She looked at him. Something careful moved across her face. "He did it," she said. "Not me. You made it possible." She accepted that with a single nod, and left. He stood at his desk for a long while after. He looked at the wall. He thought about a number of things, and was honest with himself about all of them. On Thursday of that week he went back to the kitchen in the mornings. Not because he had made a formal decision about it, simply because he wanted to be there, and he had been finding reasons not to be. And he had decided that finding reasons not to be somewhere you want to be is a poor way to conduct a life. He came down at 7:30. Elias was eating. Sarah was at the other end of the table with her book. The lamp was on. The kitchen smelled like oatmeal and tea, and the particular clean warmth of a room that has been properly looked after. He poured coffee and sat at the table, and looked at the pale November light coming through the window, and he did not open a document, or start a call, or find a reason to be elsewhere. He came back Friday morning, and Saturday. On Saturday, Elias brought his drawing things to the kitchen table for the first time. He arranged his paper and crayons and drew while Raiden had his coffee and Sarah had her tea, and the morning settled around all three of them in the warmth and the quiet, and Raiden looked at the drawing from across the table without making it obvious. It was the field path, the frost on the grass, a bird with wings spread wide, moving through the air above the wall. He thought, "This is my son, and my son is drawing the world again, and he is at the kitchen table, because this is where the people are." Something shifted in his chest, deep and slow and long overdue. "That's a good drawing," he said to Elias. Elias looked at him. He looked at the drawing. "Bird," he said. "Good bird," Raiden said. Elias went back to drawing. Raiden looked at Sarah. She looked up from her book and looked back. The understanding moved between them cleanly, without needing words, which felt right in a house where a child was slowly learning that words were worth the effort. Outside, on the garden gate, the sparrow sat in the November light, patient and still, as if it had been there all along and simply had not been noticed until now. The estate had a particular quality in the early mornings of November that she had not experienced in any other house she had ever worked in. The light came in low, through the east-facing windows, gray and thin and honest, and it caught the dust motes that were always rising in any occupied house, and made them visible for a few minutes, suspended and turning in the cold air, before the house warmed enough to set them moving differently. She noticed this because she was always up early and always watching. It was her nature, and it served her work, and she had stopped apologizing for it a long time ago. She noticed, that November, that the dust motes in the kitchen rose in the same direction every morning. She noticed that the sparrow arrived at the gate at approximately the same time each day, between 7:40 and 8, depending on the cloud cover. She noticed that Mrs. Pryor always set the soup pot on the left ring of the hob, and that the spoon was always facing the same direction, and that there was a specific order in which she did things that never varied. She noticed that Raiden drank his first cup of coffee standing at the counter, and his second cup sitting at the table, and that this transition was the moment in his morning when something shifted in him, when he went from the compressed and efficient person who had been up since 6, and had been working since before 7, to the person who was going to be in the kitchen for a while. She noticed everything. It was how she worked. It was how she loved, too, if she was honest with herself, by paying attention, by remembering, by understanding that to see a person clearly was a form of respect that could not be faked. The pack had its rhythms, too, and she was learning those. There were certain days of the month when more people came to the estate, advisors, elders, betas with documents. There were days when Raiden was in his office from early morning to late evening, and came to dinner late and ate quickly and was gone again. There were quieter days when he was in the kitchen in the mornings for longer than usual, reading rather than working, present in a way that had more room in it. On one of the quieter days in November, she had been at the kitchen table with her sketchbook when he had come in and poured coffee and then, unexpectedly, unusually, sat down at the table rather than taking the coffee back to his office, not across from her. At the near end of the table, close to the counter, a respectable and professional distance from where she was sitting. He had read something on his phone for a while. She had drawn. After about 20 minutes he had said, without looking up from his phone. "What are you drawing?" "The garden wall," she said. He looked up. She turned the sketchbook slightly so he could see. He looked at the drawing for a moment. He looked at the garden wall outside the window. "You've made it look better than it is," he said. "It's a good wall," she said. "I haven't embellished." He looked at the drawing again. "No," he said. "I suppose you haven't." He went back to his phone. She went back to drawing. They stayed in the kitchen like that for another 40 minutes, in a silence that was comfortable in the way that silence between two people who are separately occupied can be comfortable, shared but not requiring anything, a companionship of presence rather than interaction. He left for his office eventually. She stayed and finished the drawing. She thought about that morning sometimes, about the particular quality of the silence, about what it had felt like to be in a room with someone and have it feel natural, easy, neither of them performing or requiring anything of the other. She thought about how rare that was, and how you could not manufacture it, and how its presence in a relationship was one of the most reliable signs that the relationship was the right kind. She was very careful with these thoughts. She kept them at the appropriate distance, and did not let them make claims she was not prepared to back up. But she had them. She was honest about that. The sixth word was good. He said it on a Tuesday, when she set his oatmeal in front of him, looked at the bowl, looked at her, said good, with the flat certainty of a verdict. She said, "Glad to hear it," and sat down with her own breakfast and her book, and the morning continued. She told Raiden that evening, 6 words, he said. "No, cold. Morning. More. Please. Good. Yes." He said them all in order, slowly, the way she had started to notice he did, going through the sequence as if he were counting something precious, making sure he had not missed any. "What comes after 6, he said. "More words," she said. "And then combinations. And then sentences." "How long?" "I don't know exactly," she said. "But I am more certain every day that it is coming. He is not stuck. He is moving. You can feel it in the house." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I can." She found, in the course of the 4th week, that she had begun to look forward to the evenings. Not dramatically. Not in a way she felt she had to manage or examine too carefully. Simply as a fact of her days, the evenings were good, and she looked forward to them. The evenings were when Raiden came to the kitchen or the sitting room, after Elias was in bed, and they talked, or sat together quietly, or worked in the same space, without needing to address the fact that they were in the same space. The evenings were when he was most fully himself, not less composed, exactly, but more real. The management present but not foregrounded, the person visible. She thought he probably knew she looked forward to the evenings. She thought he probably looked forward to them too. They were very careful about this, both of them, in the specific way of two people who have understood something without saying it, and are choosing to let it stay unsaid until it is ready. On Wednesday of that week, she was in the sitting room with her book when he came in from his office and stopped in the doorway. He had been on a difficult call, she could tell by the particular quality of how he was carrying himself. "Sit down," she said, without looking up. "I'll make tea." He sat. She made the tea. She brought it and sat back down and opened her book, and he sat with his tea, and the difficult call receded the way things recede when you are in a warm room with a warm cup and a person who is not asking anything of you. After a while he said, "There are days when being responsible for things is very heavy." "Yes," she said. "I don't usually say that to anyone." "I know," she said. He was quiet. "It feels different to say it to you," he said. "Less like a complaint. More like a fact," she said. "Yes," he said, "like a fact." She looked up from her book. She held his gaze for a moment. "It is a fact," she said. "It doesn't require a solution. It's just true." He nodded. They finished their tea and said goodnight, and she went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about the specific quality of being seen. Not the performing of being seen, but the actual thing. Someone looking at you and knowing something true about what you are, and simply receiving it without flinching or fixing. She thought she was good at that. She thought, in the dark of the December bedroom, that it might be the thing she was best at. And she thought, with the quiet honesty she brought to everything, so is he. The storm came on a Wednesday night in November, Earlier in the season than storms usually arrived in this territory, but not impossibly so. Sarah heard it start just before midnight. First the pressure change, the particular shift in the air outside the windows, and then the wind arriving all at once, sudden and serious, pushing hard against the west face of the house. She lay still and listened for a few minutes, getting the measure of it, and then she listened for the silence from Elias's room next door, which told her he was asleep and undisturbed. She reached for her phone, turned on the flashlight, and sat up. She went to the hallway, checked his door. He was curled on his side, the heavy sweater draped over his blanket. She pulled his door shut gently and went downstairs. The power had gone out completely. The house was dark in the deep way that happens when all the electrical hum and the pilot lights and the standby glow of a lived-in house vanish at once. She found the emergency drawer in the kitchen by phone light and was lighting the second candle when the hallway door opened and Raiden came in. He had a candle already lit, cupped in one hand. He stopped when he saw her. Neither of them was startled. They had both had exactly the same instinct at exactly the same moment, which she thought said something about both of them that she did not fully examine right then. "Elias is asleep," she said. "I checked," he said. Of course he had. He set his candle on the counter. She lit two more from it. The kitchen warmed with the light, the particular quality of candlelight that makes everything feel closer and more deliberate and slightly outside of ordinary time. Neither of them went back upstairs. She put the kettle on. The gas still worked, and when it boiled she made tea, and they sat at the kitchen table across from each other, with the storm at the windows and the house dark and quiet around them, and it was midnight in November, and there was nowhere either of them needed to be. The conversation began with something ordinary. She asked whether storms came this early in the season, and he said not usually, but the last 2 years had been unpredictable. She mentioned that the trees in the garden had lost their leaves faster than she expected, and he said the ones along the north wall always went early because of the angle of the wind from the north ridge. She asked about the ridge and he described it, the path, the view from the top in late autumn, the particular quality of the light when the heather was gone and the grass was short and close to the ground. He had walked it often when he was younger, less recently. "It was a place we went together," he said, looking at the candle rather than at her. She liked the view from the top. She understood. She did not fill the silence. "The path will still be there," she said, after a moment, not as comfort, simply as fact. "Yes," he said, "it will." He told her about his wife's laugh. He offered it, carefully, as if he had been holding it for a very long time, and had decided, in the particular privacy of a midnight kitchen, with the power out, and a storm at the windows, that it was time to set it somewhere outside of himself. His wife had laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. She could never hold it. The setup would set her off and she would have to stop and compose herself before she could reach the end. And by then he already knew the punchline, because he had been watching her face. He described this with precise care, the way you are precise about something that still matters enormously, because you do not want to lose the exact shape of it by making it approximate. She listened. She did not say anything after he finished. She let the shape of it exist in the room without covering it over with words. "She would have liked you," he said. She received this without knowing quite what to do with it. "I'm glad," she said simply. "You're not alike," he said, looking at the candle. She was loud in the best way. She had strong opinions about things that didn't matter. She talked over people when she was excited about something. He almost smiled, small and genuine. "You're quiet, you're careful, but the thing underneath, some quality at the center, is similar, the part that cares about the right things." She thought about this honestly. "Caring about the right things," she said. "Yes, that exactly." A gust of wind hit the east wall and both candle flames bent sideways and steadied. She watched them settle. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When did you decide to stop coming to breakfast in the mornings? In the first weeks, you always ate in your office, then you came back." He considered this the way he considered everything that mattered, not quickly, not carelessly. "Because I wanted to be there," he said, "and I had been finding reasons not to be. And I decided that finding reasons not to be somewhere you want to be is a poor way to live." "That is a good decision," she said. "I thought so," he said. Another gust. The rain shifted in direction, heavier now, hitting the windows in long waves. She had no idea what time it was. The candles had burned down a third of their length. "Elias is going to wake up one morning soon and want to tell you about something," she said. "Not a word at a time. A whole account of something he saw or thought. He's going to want to describe it to you." He looked at her. "You're certain?" he said. "Yes," she said. She said it plainly, because she was. "What does it look like from where you are?" he asked. "What does it actually look like, day to day, watching him?" She thought about it carefully. "It looks like someone who spent a very long time not trusting the world enough to describe it," she said. "And now he is starting, very carefully, to trust it again. One word at a time. He is deciding which things are worth naming. That is not a small thing. That is someone deciding that language is worth the risk of using." He was quiet. "Language is worth the risk," he repeated, slowly, turning it over. "Yes," she said. He looked at her across the table in the candlelight. His expression was more open than she had seen it. The management was soft, and the control was present, but gentle. He looked like himself. She looked back steadily. When the rain thinned to a steady sound against the glass, she washed both cups and said goodnight. He said goodnight. She took a candle upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time before she lay down. She was not going to make anything of the evening. It had been a storm, and a power cut, and 2 adults who stayed awake in the kitchen, and that was what it was. But she had sat with him in the candlelight and heard him talk about his wife's laugh, and she had felt entirely herself the entire time, which was not a small thing. And in the morning, when she made his coffee the way he had it, and set it at his usual spot, he looked at it, and then looked at her, and sat down, and said good morning in the voice of someone who is handling something carefully, because they have decided it is worth handling carefully. Some things did not need saying to be known. She had, by the 5th week, accumulated a body of knowledge about Elias Voss that no file could have provided, and no professional assessment could have captured. She knew that he always oriented the drawing paper slightly to the left before he began, that he never used anything other than red for the birds themselves, but had recently started using other colors for backgrounds and details. She knew that he processed new information by becoming very still, not distressed still but thinking still, the stillness of a mind working. She knew that he liked the kitchen lamp on when the sky was overcast, that he preferred his toast slightly less toasted than the usual setting on the toaster, that he would eat the center of a piece of fruit before the edges. She knew that he watched his father when Raiden was in the room, and did not think anyone was watching him watch. He tracked Raiden's movements the way you track something you love and are slightly afraid of losing, steadily, from the side, with the specific combination of longing and caution that belongs to people who have learned that things can be taken away. She had told Raiden some of this, carefully, in the evenings after dinner. Not all of it at once, that would have been too much, a flood of observation that he would not have been able to sit with comfortably. She parceled it out, giving him 1 or 2 things at a time, the things she thought he was most ready to hear. He listened to everything she said with the same total attention he brought to all important things. One evening she told him, "He watches you." Raiden was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "You don't look directly at him when you know he's watching," she said. "I didn't want to make him." He stopped. "Self-conscious," she said. "Yes. You've been protecting him from your attention," she said. It's the right instinct. But he's ready for more than that now. He's ready for you to look back when he looks." Raiden held his glass. He looked at the table. "How?" he said, not defensively, genuinely asking. "The same way you look at a drawing when he shows it to you," she said, honestly, without making too much of it, like it's a normal thing. He was quiet for a moment. "Looking at my son is a normal thing," he said, with some dryness. "Yes," she said. "It is, and he is ready for you to do it." The next morning, when Elias looked up from his breakfast to look at Raiden, the sideways, careful look she had been watching for weeks, Raiden looked back. Directly, briefly, just caught the boy's eyes and held them for a moment, and then looked back at his coffee. Elias looked at his bowl, looked at his father again. Raiden looked at him again. A small nod, acknowledgement. Elias went back to eating. But he sat differently after that, less angled, less protective of his peripheral space, more simply present at the table. She watched this from behind her book and did not say anything about it. because some things were between a father and his son, and had nothing to do with her, and she was good at knowing which things those were. The 5th week brought the word want, and please, and a day when Elias said, please more, 2 words together, for the first time, because he wanted more apple, and he was being polite about wanting it. She told Raiden that evening. 2 words, together, 1 thought. He went through the sequence of all the words again, adding these to the count. He's building sentences, Raiden said. He is beginning to, she said. The pieces are there. Now he is learning how to put them together. What does it feel like, he said. For him, when he finds a new word. What do you think it feels like? She considered this seriously. Like finding a tool that fits exactly the job you needed it for, she said. Like having been trying to open something with your hands and being given the right key. He looked at her. That's a good way to describe it, he said. I think about it a lot, she said. I can tell, he said. I can tell every time you describe something about him. You have thought about it before you say it. You don't say things you haven't thought about. She held his gaze. Neither do you, she said. Something in his expression, she could not have said exactly what, but she felt it. The small and specific shift of something landing somewhere it intended to land. No, he said. I don't. They sat in the kitchen in the November evening, and the house was warm, and the silence between them was comfortable in the way it had been that morning at the kitchen table, when he had looked at her drawing of the garden wall, and outside the wind was low, and the sparrow was gone for the night, but would come back in the morning. She was very good, by now, at waiting for things that would come back. The word please came on a Saturday, when Elias wanted a crayon just out of reach, and he looked at it, and looked at her, and said, please, as simply and naturally, as if he had been saying it all his life, because in some way he had been. He had just been saying it without sound, with the posture of his body, and the direction of his attention, and the small careful gestures that she had learned to read. Now it had a word. Now it was legible to anyone who was listening. She passed him the crayon. He said nothing else. He used it to draw. She sat at the other end of the table, and looked at her book, and felt the specific weight of that single syllable, which was the weight of a child, who had decided that politeness was worth the risk of using, that the word would be received correctly, that she would give him the crayon when he asked for it, and not make anything of the asking. She gave him the crayon. She did not make anything of it. Later, she told Raiden. He said the words in order. No, cold, morning, more, Sarah, want, please, counting them on his fingers the way he always did. She had noticed this habit of his, the counting. She thought it was his way of holding each word as a specific and separate thing, of not letting them blur together into a general impression of progress, of insisting on the reality of each individual one. 7, he said. Yes, she said. He's polite, Raiden said. There was something in his voice, not quite amusement, not quite grief, but somewhere between the two. He was always polite, even before. He stopped. She waited. She made a thing of it, he said. Manners. She had strong feelings about manners. Said they were about paying attention to other people, that you couldn't be polite without noticing someone. He paused. Elias always noticed. Yes, she said quietly. He does. Raiden looked at his glass. He got that from her, he said. That quality. She thought about this. She thought about a 6-year-old boy who had been watching the world for 2 years without words, noticing everything, and who had just said please to a woman he had let into his house because the word felt right, and she had earned it. He got it from both of you, she said. Raiden looked at her. Both of you, she said again. You showed up for him every single day, even when it produced nothing, even when there was no visible response. That is noticing someone. That is the same thing, in a different form. He was quiet for a moment. I hadn't thought of it that way, he said. I know, she said, but it's true. She said goodnight and went upstairs, and she lay in her room and thought about the specific quality of the silence that had followed. Not the empty kind, not the sad kind, but the kind that comes after something has been said and received and has gone somewhere it was needed. The sparrow was on the gate in the morning. It always was. The 5th word was her name. Elias said it on a Friday evening, clearly and without any prompting at all, because she had stepped out of the back room briefly, and he had wanted to know where she was. She was in the hallway when it happened. She heard it. Sarah. Her name placed in the air like a physical object, like something that had particular weight and value, and belonged to a specific place. She heard Raiden's voice, from nearby. "She'll be right back." A pause. Then again, from Elias. "Sarah." She walked back to the doorway. He looked up from his drawing and looked at her with his serious dark eyes, and she said, "I'm here." He looked at her for a moment, then he went back to drawing. She sat back down. She kept her face and her voice exactly as they always were. That night, after Elias was in bed and the house had settled, Raiden found her in the kitchen. He stood at the counter with a glass of water and the particular quality of presence that meant he had been thinking about something. "He said your name tonight," Raiden said. "I heard. Twice. I know." He looked at his glass. "The specialist said, when we first saw them, just after she died, they said not to expect verbal progress without intensive structured intervention, regular sessions, clinical consistency." He paused. "He said your name twice in the back room because you stepped out, and he wanted to know where you were." "Children know who is safe," she said. "Elias knows, so he uses language when it feels safe to use it. You made it safe. He decided I was. That is a different thing." He looked up from the glass. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Giving him the credit. It belongs to him. It belongs to both of you," he said. And it was not a negotiation. It was a statement. She held his gaze. "Both of us, then," she said. Something in his face settled, the specific settling of something that has been held slightly off balance and has finally found its level. "You're honest," he said. "Usually. It's noticeable," he said. "In a house where people have been very careful with each other, it is very noticeable." She was not entirely sure what to do with that, so she smiled, slightly, and he caught it, and his expression did one of those small and careful movements. Not quite a smile, but the motion toward one, the beginning of a gesture kept private. She said goodnight and went upstairs. The days that followed moved with a different quality. Nothing had changed in the overt structure of the household. She still did her job. Raiden still ran his. Elias still drew and walked and placed his careful words into the world one at a time. But something that had been held at arm's length was closer now, and the distance was not going back to what it was. Raiden was at breakfast every morning now, not arriving but simply being there, the way a person is present in a place that belongs to them. He sat at the table with his coffee and watched his son draw, and sometimes said quiet things that Elias acknowledged in his particular silent way. And it was a family's morning. She used that word only inside her own head, and carefully, but she used it. Elias was using words every day now, 2 or 3 new ones each week, not just to ask for things but to name them, to describe them, to agree with something that had been said. He said gray one morning looking at the sky. He said loud when Mrs. Pryor dropped a pan, and Mrs. Pryor said yes, very loud, without turning around, which was precisely the right response. He said good when his breakfast was right. He said there when she asked where he wanted his drawing paper. The 6th word, want, came on a Saturday morning when he looked at the apple bowl on the counter and then looked at Sarah. "Want," he said. She got him an apple. "He is requesting now," Raiden said that evening. "Not just observing, not just naming." "Yes." "What comes after single words?" he asked. 2 words together, then 3, then a complete sentence. "It won't be a straight line. There will be harder days between the good ones, but the direction is fixed now." "How long?" "I can't say exactly, but it is going to happen." She said it the way she said things she knew to be true, plainly, and without decoration. "He is going to talk to you, really talk, the way he used to." He was very still. "What is he going to say?" he asked, very quietly. She understood the question underneath the question. "Things a boy tells his father," she said. "Whatever he has been holding, and you will be able to hear it, and it will be all right." He looked at the table. He looked back up. "More," he said quietly. It was Elias's 3rd word. She heard him choose it deliberately, heard the specific weight he gave it. She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. More. Neither of them said anything else. She got up and washed her glass, and went to the door. "Sarah," he said. She stopped. He had never used her name before. Not once, in all the weeks. It had always been Miss Calloway, appropriate and professional, and the right distance. She felt her own name and his voice settle into her, before she had time to do anything about it. She turned. "Good night," he said. Just that. "Good night," she said. She went upstairs. She stood in her room for a while, without doing anything in particular, just standing, being very honest with herself about what she felt, and then letting it be what it was, and then getting ready for bed with her composure fully intact. Outside the window, the November night was dark and still, and the garden was silver where the frost had settled on the wall, and the sparrow was somewhere asleep, patient and warm, and waiting for the morning, the way it always was, the way it always had been. The storm had changed something, and she knew it, and he knew it, and neither of them spoke about it directly in the days afterward. It was not the kind of thing that needed speaking about directly. It lived in the space between them now, in the way they stood in the kitchen, in the way morning conversations ran a little longer, in the way he had started saying her name without the formality of Miss before it. He had said Sarah for the first time on the Thursday after the storm. He said it across the kitchen when she was making breakfast and he was pouring coffee, said it easily, and without apparent awareness that he was doing something different from what he had always done. She had said yes, and he had asked her something ordinary about the morning schedule, and the conversation had continued, and she had kept her face entirely neutral and turned back to the stove. But she had felt it. She felt the shape of her own name in his voice, and let it settle, privately, before she set it down. The word count continued to climb. Elias was now using language every day, and the words were coming faster, not in a rush, not with the desperation of something that had been too long contained, but with the steadiness of someone who had learned to trust a process, and was letting the process work at its own pace. Dark, soft, warm, same, different, right, there, yes. Short, direct, descriptive. The vocabulary of a child taking inventory of the world. And then, on a Tuesday, that was cold and low-skied and otherwise completely unremarkable, Elias looked at his father at the breakfast table, looked at him directly, the first time she had seen him initiate direct eye contact with Raiden, and said, "Good morning, Dad." 4 words, a complete greeting, directed to his father by name. She heard it from across the kitchen. She kept her hands on the counter and her eyes on the window and did not look at either of them. She heard Raiden's voice. It was very quiet and very steady. "Good morning, Elias," he said. Elias went back to his oatmeal. She made her tea and sat at the far end of the table and opened her book and read the same sentence 4 times without retaining a word of it. Later that day, after Elias was in bed, she was in the kitchen when Raiden came in. He stood at the counter for a moment without speaking. She waited. "He called me Dad," he said. "Yes," she said. "He did." He turned around. He looked at her directly, and his face was... She had seen it open before, after the storm, in the kitchen over tea at midnight. But this was different. This was not the managed open she had come to know, not the careful version. This was simply open, all the way down. She held his gaze. "He called me Dad," he said again, not repeating it because she hadn't heard it, repeating it because he needed to hear himself say it, because it was real, and saying it made it more real. "Yes," she said again. "He did. He said good morning to his father, because that is what he wanted to say." Raiden looked at her for a long time. Then he turned back to the counter. She heard him pour water. She heard him stand at the counter for a while in the specific kind of silence that people occupy when they are feeling something very large and are choosing to feel it privately. She let him. She made her tea and said good night and went upstairs, and she lay in her room and listened to the sounds of the house settling into the night, and she thought about a 6-year-old boy who had gone from 1 word to 4-word sentences in under 8 weeks, and she thought about what it took, not from her, not from any professional, but from the child himself, the specific daily courage of it, the decision to keep trying, the willingness to put words into the world, even knowing that words could be misunderstood, or ignored, or met with the wrong response. She thought he was very brave. She thought so every day. but she thought it particularly that night. The snow came on the first day of December, light and tentative, melting by mid-morning but leaving the garden white for those few hours. Elias stood at the back room window and watched it fall, and then watched it melt, and he said, "Gone now." 2 words, 1 thought, a complete observation about a temporary condition. Gone now. Yes, and also not permanently. It would come back. Everything came back. She told Raiden that evening, and he said, "Gone now," softly, the way he always said the new things, tasting them. He understood it was temporary, she said, not permanent. That's a more complex idea than it sounds. The idea that gone is not the same as gone forever. Raiden was very still for a moment. "No," he said, "it isn't." She held her cup. He held his. The kitchen was warm, and the December dark was outside the windows, and the sparrow was gone for the night, as it was every night, as it would be back in the morning, as it always was. 3 words came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was at the kitchen table, and she was at the counter cutting vegetables, and he looked up from his drawing and said, with complete calm, "Bird looks right." She stopped cutting. She turned very carefully, so he would not feel the weight of being observed. He was looking at the drawing with the expression of someone who has assessed something and come to a settled conclusion. A bird with very precise feathers, a good shadow, the specific angle of a wing in flight. "It does," she said. "It looks exactly right." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to work. She finished cutting the vegetables. She told Raiden that evening. Not immediately. She waited until they were both in the kitchen after dinner, until the house was quiet, and Elias was in bed, and the evening had the particular quality it had lately, of 2 people in a room who did not need to fill the space. He evaluated his own work, Raiden said. "Yes." He made a judgment and told you what he thought. "Yes." Raiden was quiet for a moment. "He used to do that," he said. "Before. He used to show us his drawings and tell us what he thought of them. He always had opinions about them. Whether they were right. He still has opinions," she said. "He always had them. He just didn't have a safe way to express them. And now he does. And now he does," she said. He looked at the table. He looked up. Something in his face was the specific quality of a person who is carrying something large and beautiful and is not quite sure what to do with it. "What comes after 3-word sentences?" he asked. 4-word sentences, she said, then 5, then longer. They build on themselves. Each sentence makes the next one more possible. "How long until a real conversation?" he said. "The kind where he tells me things. What happened, what he thinks, what he wants." She looked at him steadily. "Not long," she said. "He is already having conversations. You are already in them. You have been in them for weeks." He looked at her. "The mornings," she said. "The drawing at the kitchen table. The walk in the field path. The way he brought his dishes to the counter. The way he said, 'Dad.' Those were conversations, without the full vocabulary yet, but conversations." He was very still. "You have not been waiting," she said. "You have been talking." He heard all of it. He set down his glass. He looked at the counter for a moment. "Thank you," he said. It was the specific thank you that meant considerably more than the word contained. The thank you that was really, "I needed to hear that, and I did not know I needed it, and now I have it." "Good night," she said. She went upstairs. Outside the window, the December night was deep and cold and still, and the gate was empty, and the garden was silver with frost, and everything was waiting for morning with the patient certainty of things that knew the morning would come. On a Tuesday in mid-December, she asked him to describe the view from the North Ridge again. They were in the kitchen after dinner, both with tea, and she asked because Elias had been drawing landscapes with more ambition lately, wider views, higher horizons, and she had been thinking about the ridge and what it looked like, and whether she could describe it to him in enough detail to understand what he might be imagining. Raiden described it. He was precise and unhurried, the way he was about things that mattered to him. The heather gone in December, the grass short and silver, the feeling of being very high up, and the land being very flat, in every direction, except the descent behind you. The light on clear days, a pale, honest winter light, the kind that did not flatter, but that showed everything clearly. She used to say it was the most truthful place she knew, he said. The ridge. She said you couldn't pretend anything up there. No, she said. I imagine not. He looked at his cup. I haven't been able to go since she died, he said. I kept thinking I would. I kept planning to, but I never. You will, she said. He looked up. With Elias, she said, when he has enough words. That is the plan, isn't it? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. That's the plan. Then it will happen, she said. Things that are planned with that kind of intention happen. He looked at her for a long moment. You're very certain about things, he said. Only the things I'm certain about, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close. How do you know which things those are? I pay attention, she said. I watch the evidence accumulate, and when there's enough, I know. He looked at his cup. He looked back at her. And when you know, he said, you say so. Yes, she said. When I know, I say so. The kitchen was quiet. The December dark was outside the windows, and the lamp was on, and the tea was warm, and both of them were exactly where they were supposed to be. Good, he said. Just that. She said goodnight and went upstairs, and she lay in her room and thought about the specific quality of certainty, how rare it was, how different from confidence, how it did not announce itself but simply was, the way the sparrow was on the gate every morning, because that was where it was, and it knew it, and there was nothing further to say about it. She was certain about some things. She had been for a while. She was going to let those things be certain in their own time. The thing about a house that has been quiet for too long is that when it starts to fill again, you notice every sound differently, not as noise, as presence. Elias's footsteps on the stairs, now heavier and less tentative, the footsteps of a child who has decided the stairs are reliable. Raiden's voice in the morning, steadier than it had been in October, less compressed. The sound of 3 people in a kitchen, who all belong there. Sarah had started to feel the house differently, not as a professional environment she was navigating carefully, but as a place, which was, she told herself firmly, both entirely reasonable after 7 weeks, and something she was going to keep watching. She was still watching. The 7th word was no again, but completely differently. He said it on a Monday, when she offered him toast, and then immediately added, apple. 2 words in sequence, one refusing an offer, and one providing an alternative. He had not just refused, he had redirected. He had told her what he actually wanted. She got him apple. She explained to Raiden what made it different, and Raiden listened with his full and complete attention, which was one of his most consistent qualities. He gave an alternative, Raiden said. Yes, he expressed a preference. He told me what he wanted, instead of just what he did not want. That is a conversation, Raiden said. That is exactly what it is, she agreed. He looked at the pale November light through the kitchen window. It was low now, barely getting above the tree line before it started back down, but it was still light. I want to take him to the North Ridge, Raiden said, partly to himself. When he has enough words to tell me what he sees from the top. She looked at him. One of the most quietly beautiful things she had heard him say. That is a very good plan, she said. He looked at her, slightly surprised to have said it aloud, then accepting that she had received it without making it too large. He nodded. Gillian Howard came on Thursday for the routine check-in. She was efficient, and asked Sarah careful questions with a notebook open, and wrote the answers down precisely. Sarah answered honestly, the word count, the context for each word, the full progression from nonverbal to 2-word communications over 7 weeks. You've made significant progress where others did not, Gillian Howard said. I didn't have a method, Sarah said. I just committed to not making things worse. Gillian Howard blinked. I think that understates it somewhat. I don't think it does, Sarah said, pleasantly. Every caregiver before me had a method. Methods are legitimate. None of them worked for Elias. What worked was someone deciding that the most important thing was to not push him backward. Everything else came from that decision. Gillian Howard wrote something in her notebook. Raiden had been in the doorway during part of this. He had come to offer tea, and stayed when the conversation was already in progress. She was aware of him without looking directly. She heard the particular stillness of someone who is listening and deciding what to do with what they hear. After Gillian Howard left, he found her in the back room. That was well said, he said from the doorway. It was true, she said. Both can be true at the same time. She looked at him over her shoulder. He was leaning against the doorframe with the particular ease of someone who had learned, slowly and deliberately, to be comfortable in a specific space. Corden told me something, he said. After he was here for lunch a few weeks ago, he said you seemed like someone who knew the difference between what they were there for and what they were doing. She kept tidying the drawings. What do you think it means? I think it means you know your job and you do it, he said, but that you are also doing something more than your job, and that you are aware of that, and that you are careful about it. She stopped. She turned. Yes, she said, that is accurate. He looked at her steadily. The management was quieter than usual, not gone, but soft, the way it was when he was being real. I am careful too, he said. I know, she said. A pause. I think careful is right, he said, for now. I think so too, she said. They looked at each other in the back room with the drawings around them, and the thin November light through the windows. Nothing happened, and everything was understood, and both of those things were true at the same time. Then she turned back to the drawings. He said something about dinner. The evening moved forward in its ordinary and entirely unremarkable way. She was very composed all evening. She was composed when she said good night, and composed all the way upstairs and into her room, and then she sat on the edge of her bed, and pressed her hands flat on her knees, and breathed, and was not composed at all, for about 3 minutes, privately and without witnesses. Then she got ready for bed, and lay down and went to sleep. On Saturday, Elias said, please, when he wanted a crayon that was just out of reach. He looked at it and said, please, and she passed it to him, and he took it and used it, and the transaction was so completely ordinary and human that she had to devote considerable attention to her book for the next several minutes to keep her expression appropriate. 9 distinct communicative words now, and coming faster. On Sunday afternoon, she was in the kitchen when she heard voices from the back room. 2 voices. Radin's low one, and, under it, a smaller voice responding. She could not make out the words, but the quality was unmistakable. Elias was answering his father in language. She stayed in the kitchen and let it happen. 10 minutes later, Radin came in. He looked at her, and his face was open in a way she had never seen it. The management completely gone, all the way down. He told me, Radin said. He looked at the window and said, Bird is gone. I said, maybe it went somewhere warm. He thought about it. He said, come back. She waited. He was asking, Radin said. He wanted to know if it would come back. He asked me because he thought I would know. He trusted you to know, she said. He pressed his hand flat on the counter and held it there. He asked his father, she said, because he believed you had the answer. The kitchen was warm, and the evening was quiet, and the thing that was happening was large, and being held very quietly, which was exactly the right way to hold it. Tea? He said, after a moment, in a voice that was warm in a way she had not heard before. Yes, she said. He put the kettle on. She sat at the table, and outside the window the sparrow was gone for the night, but it would come back. They both knew it would come back. That was the kind of knowledge that did not need saying. The days between the 8th and 9th weeks of December had a quality she would remember afterward, as a particular kind of fullness. Not dramatic fullness, not the kind that announces itself and demands acknowledgement. The quiet kind. The kind that builds in rooms where people have learned to be easy with each other, where the silences are comfortable, and the conversations do not need to cover any distance before they arrive somewhere true. She was in the back room one afternoon helping Elias sort through his drawings. He had begun to want them organized in a certain way that she had not yet fully decoded, but she was patient with the process. When he stopped what he was doing and looked at the window. Bird is coming back, he said. 4 words, a complete sentence, a prediction, made with calm confidence, about the sparrow. She looked at the window. The garden gate was empty. Not yet, she said. He waited. She waited. 3 minutes later, the sparrow landed on the gate. He said, see. She looked at him. He was looking at the gate with the expression of someone who has confirmed a hypothesis they were not in any doubt about. Yes, she said. I see. She told Radin that evening, and he listened with his whole attention as he always did, and when she finished he sat with it for a moment and then said, He predicted it. Yes. He observed the pattern. The bird comes back, and he expected it to hold. He understood that patterns hold. Yes, she said. He understands continuity. Raiden looked at the table for a moment. He looked up. That's a significant thing, isn't it? He said. Yes, she said. It is. He was quiet again. She thought she understood what he was thinking about. Continuity. The things that held. The things that could be expected to come back. She thought about what she knew about grief, and about children, and about the specific kind of damage that happened when a child lost a parent very young. She thought about how much of what Elias had lost was not just a person, but a pattern. The specific, reliable, daily pattern of his mother, the expectation of her, the certainty that she would be there. And she thought about how long it had taken him to start extending that expectation to other things. To trust that the bird would come back, to trust that morning would come back, to trust that the people in his house would be there. She thought about what it meant that he had extended that trust to her, to Raiden, to the sparrow on the gate. She held these thoughts carefully, in the quiet of the evening, and then she let them rest. The drawing Elias brought her on the 28th was different from the others. Not a bird, or rather, not only a bird. It was a wide landscape, viewed from above and far away, with figures in it. 3 small figures on a ridge, and below them a house, and below the house a garden with a gate, and on the gate a very small bird that you had to look closely to see. 3 figures on a ridge, a bird on a gate, everything in its place. It's beautiful, she told him, because it was. He looked at it for a moment. The ridge, he said. We will go. Yes, she said, we will. He nodded and took the drawing back. This one he was not leaving with her. Not yet, she understood. He had shown it to her, but he was not done with it. He was going to keep working on it. She told Raiden about the drawing that evening. Not the drawing itself, not what it contained, the 3 figures, the house below, because that still felt like something that belonged to her and Elias. But she told him about the quality of it, the ambition of it, the way it organized a landscape and placed people within it. He is drawing the world as it will be, she said, not just as it is. Raiden held his glass. Anticipation, he said. Yes, he is anticipating. He is imagining the future and drawing it. That's a good sign, Raiden said. It's a very good sign, she said. He looked at her across the table. She looked back. And between them, in the warm kitchen at the end of December, the thing that had been growing since October was very nearly ready to be said. Soon, he said. Just that. Yes, she said. Soon. She went to bed that night with the feeling of something that was almost arrived, that was at the door, that would be inside the house very shortly. The feeling she had had in October when the second word came. The feeling that a direction had been set, and was not going to change. The sparrow came in the morning. It always came in the morning. She counted on it now. The way she had come to count on the lamplight in the kitchen, and the sound of the crayon, and the particular way Raiden said her name when he came in, and found her already there. The way she had come to count on all the things in this house that had decided to stay. On the 26th of December, 2 days after Christmas, Elias brought her a drawing that was different from all the previous ones. It was not a bird. It was a room. This kitchen, rendered in careful lines. The table, the chairs, the lamp on, the window with the garden outside, and at the table, 2 figures, a woman with long hair and a small boy, each drawing on their own piece of paper. She held the drawing. That is this kitchen, she said. He nodded. And that is you, she said, pointing to the small figure. He nodded again. And that is me, she said. Yes, he said. She held it for a moment, then she said, Thank you, I'm going to put this with the others. He looked at the drawing for another moment, assessing it the way he assessed all his work, and then he turned and went back to the back room. She stood in the kitchen holding the drawing of the 2 of them at the table, in the warm lamp-lit room, drawing. She thought about what it meant that he had drawn them. Not a bird, not the garden, not the landscape. The 2 of them, together, in the kitchen, doing the thing they did together. He had made a picture of their life. She was very careful, standing at the kitchen counter in the December afternoon, about not making too much of it. She was a professional. She was here for a professional purpose. She held the shape of things. But she also held the drawing, and both things were true. She told Raiden that evening. She told him what the drawing contained and what she thought it meant, and he listened with his whole attention the way he always did. He drew you both, Raiden said. Yes. Together. In the kitchen. Yes. He looked at the table. He looked up. He is drawing what feels like home to him, he said. Yes, she said. I think that's exactly right. He was quiet for a long moment. She waited, because she had learned that his silences were often more full than other people's words. I want to show him something, he said, finally. I want to take him somewhere and show him something that I have been waiting to show him. When he has enough words to tell me what he thinks of it. She looked at him. The ridge, she said. Yes, he said. The ridge. She smiled, just slightly. Soon, she said. Yes, he said. Soon. He said goodnight and went upstairs, and she sat in the kitchen for a while longer with her tea, in the warm circle of the lamp, looking at the dark garden outside the window, and thinking about how things arrive, how they do not announce themselves, how they build and build and build in the small moments and the ordinary days, and then one morning a child says a word, or brings a drawing, or takes your hand on a hillside path, and you understand that the thing you had been building toward has been here for a while, waiting for you to notice. The sparrow was on the gate in the morning. It always was, and she counted on it now, the way she counted on other things that had proven themselves reliable. The lamp at 2 o'clock, the sound of the crayon, the word that came when she came down the stairs. The things in this house that had decided to stay. Raiden came to find her one evening when she was reading in the sitting room, and said, "He told me about the bird today." She looked up. He came to the office doorway, Raiden said. He was still standing in the doorway of the sitting room, the same way he always stood in doorways, as if checking whether it was all right to come in. He said the bird came back today. He said it just like that. A complete sentence. Yes, she said. He waited until I looked up from what I was doing, and then he said it, and went back to the back room. He wanted you to know, she said. Yes, Raiden said. He looked at the doorframe. He looked at her. He wanted to tell me something, and he came to tell me, and he did. Yes, she said again. He came fully into the room, and sat in the chair across from her. She set down her book. The evening was quiet around them, the lamp on, the December dark outside the windows, and Elias, somewhere upstairs, asleep with his drawings on the desk, and the sparrow gone to wherever sparrows went in the dark, and everything in this house, exactly where it was supposed to be. I have been thinking, he said, about what you said, about the conditions, safety, consistency, someone who stays. Yes, she said. I have been trying to be those things, he said. Since she died, for him, I have tried to be those things. You have been, she said. He knows it. He looked at her. How do you know, he said. How do you know he knows? Because he came to tell you about the bird, she said. He came to the office door, and he waited for you to look up, and then he told you something he had seen. That is what you do when you trust someone. You bring them things you have seen. He was quiet for a long time. He brings you drawings, he said finally. Yes, she said. And now he is bringing me words, he said. Yes, she said. He is. She picked up her book. He sat in the chair across from her. The lamp was on, and the room was warm, and outside the garden was dark and still, and somewhere in it the gate was empty, waiting for morning, waiting for the sparrow to come back. It would. It always did. December arrived with a cold that settled into the stone walls and stayed. The mornings were dark until almost 8. The evenings pulled the light down before 5, and the house responded to winter the way a good house does. The lamps came on earlier. The kitchen was always warm. The sounds of people living in a space filled the hours that the dark left behind. Elias was talking in sentences. Not all day, not without pause, but in his specific moments, usually morning, usually the kitchen, usually when something outside the window caught his attention. He produced complete and correctly structured thoughts. Short ones, but whole. On the 4th of December he stood at the kitchen window in his sweater, with his hands at his sides, and said, "The frost is very thick today." 7 words, a complete observation. subject and verb and descriptor. He said it to the window and to the room, and Raiden said, "It came in overnight." And Sarah said, "Good thing you have that sweater." And Elias said, "Yes," and came to sit down for his oatmeal, as if this had always been how mornings went. After he went to the back room, Raiden looked at Sarah across the kitchen table. She looked back. 7 words, he said. Yes. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. What was on his face was not quite relief. It was something larger than relief. Relief is what you feel when a danger passes. This was the feeling of a door opening onto something you had quietly stopped expecting to find still there. That same week, he asked her to come with him to see a family in the south part of the territory. It was the first time he had suggested she be present for anything connected to his work. She asked who would be with Elias, confirmed it was Mrs. Pryor, and said yes. The drive south was quiet and easy. He did his work when they arrived. She stayed in the background, and on the drive back he told her about the situation, the history of it, the particular difficulty of it. She listened and then asked one precise question that made him go quiet and look at the road and turn it over for the rest of the journey. Coming back through the gate, he said, "Tell me when I'm wrong." "You weren't wrong today," she said. "I was incomplete." "That's different from wrong." "You make me less incomplete," he said. Simply, like a fact he had been carrying, and had decided it was time to set down where she could see it. "All right," she said. They went inside. Elias was at the kitchen table with Mrs. Pryor, and looked up immediately when they came in, and said, "You were gone." "We were," Sarah said. "We're back." Elias looked at his father. "Did you see birds?" "No," Raiden said. "No birds today." He sat down beside his son. Elias considered this carefully. "Cold," he said. "They go when it is cold." "That's right." "And come back," Elias said. "And come back," Raiden agreed. She sat across from them. Mrs. Pryor handed out the rest of the lunch. The kitchen was full in the way it had become full over 2.5 months, not with noise, but with the particular substance of people who belong in a space together, which is a different and better kind of fullness than any other. Raiden had started reading to Elias at night on the evenings, when the boy left his door open. She would hear his voice through the wall between their rooms, low and careful, reading words that belonged to someone else's story, and she would lie in her room and listen to the muffled sound of it, not the words, just the voice, just the quality of a man who had been afraid for a long time, learning to be less afraid, and she thought about how much of what a home is made of has no name. On the 15th of December, Raiden mentioned his sister. Her name was Claire. She was coming for the holidays with her husband Owen and their daughter Penny, who was 8. Elias hadn't seen them in nearly a year. He had not been sure, earlier in the fall, that it was a good idea. Now he thought it might be. "He's ready," Sarah said. "He'll withdraw the first day. He'll be all right after." "How do you know?" "Because he knows how to be around another child. It's just rusty. It will come back quickly." He looked at her. "The way language does. The way everything does," she said, "when the conditions are right." He was quiet. "The conditions," he said, slowly. "What are the conditions?" She held his gaze. "Safety. Consistency. Someone who waits." He looked at her in a way she received fully, without managing it. "I have been learning that," he said. "I know," she said. "I am not finished learning it." "Nobody is," she said. He looked at the table. He looked back up. "I want to get this right," he said. "I want to be certain before I say anything more than that, certain enough to say it properly." "That is the right way to do it," she said. "The only way that holds." "Then I will wait until I am," he said. "All right," she said. And that was all. And it was entirely enough, and both of them knew exactly what had been agreed, without saying more than it needed. The kitchen was warm. The house was quiet. Upstairs, Elias was asleep with his sweater folded on the chair beside his bed, and outside on the gate the sparrow was gone for the night, patient and warm, in wherever sparrows go, waiting for the morning, the way it always did, the way everything reliable always does. The morning of the 30th was gray and still and cold. Sarah was in the kitchen at 7, when Elias came down with the drawing he had been working on, the wide landscape from above, the figures on the ridge, the house below with the garden and the gate, and the small bird that required looking closely to find. He stood beside her at the counter and held it out. She took it, and looked at it properly for the first time, having only seen it briefly before. 3 figures on the ridge, a small bird on the gate below. "This is the ridge," she said. He nodded. "And this is you," she said, pointing to the smallest figure, the one in the large sweater. "Yes." "And this is your dad?" "Yes." "And who is this?" she asked, pointing to the 3rd figure, the one standing at the edge of the view, looking out at the landscape. "You," he said, simply, without question. She held the drawing. "Thank you," she said. "Can I keep this one?" He considered this briefly. Then, "Yes." She added it to the folder. It went on top, above the drawing of the woman at the kitchen table. 3 figures on a ridge, the house below, the bird on the gate, all of it rendered with the careful precision that was entirely his. She kept the drawing to herself for now. Not forever. She thought she would show Raiden eventually, when the time was right. But for now it was hers. When Raiden came downstairs, Elias was already at the table eating his oatmeal, with the focused efficiency of a child who had a plan, and was moving through the preparatory steps. When Raiden came through the kitchen door, Elias looked up immediately. "Can we go to the ridge today?" he said, the same question he had asked yesterday, the same clear intention. Raiden stopped. He looked at his son. He looked at Sarah. "Yes," he said. "We can go today." He looked at her. "Will you come?" "Yes," she said. They drove to the ridge after breakfast. Elias named things out the car window all the way there. Tree, fence, brown field, snow on that hill, bird up there flying, stone wall like ours. Raiden drove and listened, and occasionally confirmed the naming. "Yes, that is a stone wall. Yes, that bird is flying very high." She sat and listened to the 2 of them, and looked at the winter landscape going past, and felt the quality of the morning, which was the quality of something important happening, in the most ordinary possible way. The path up the ridge was clear at the bottom, and icy further up. They went slowly. Elias stopped often to examine things, a piece of ice that had formed in the shape of a leaf, the specific pattern of frost on a flat stone, the way a dead thistlehead had kept its shape through the autumn and into winter. Each thing he stopped for, he named or described. Ice, cold, old flower, look. At the flat place, with the view of the estate below, he stopped and looked down at the house. "Our house," he said. "Yes," Raiden said. Elias looked at it for a long time. "Mum liked it here," he said. "You told me." Raiden crouched down. He took a moment. "Yes," he said. "She loved this path. She walked it whenever she could." "She is not here now," Elias said. "No," Raiden said. "She is not here now." Elias looked at the house below. He looked at his father. "But we are," he said. The silence lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Yes," Raiden said. "We are." Elias looked at the house one more time, and then turned and continued up. Raiden stood. She watched him press his hand flat against his thigh, and then release it. And then he walked, and she walked beside him, and they did not speak, and the ridge continued above them, and the house was below, and the sky was very wide. At the top, Elias turned in a full circle and said, "Big," and then crouched to look at the frost crystals in the grass, and Raiden crouched beside him, and the conversation that followed was about frost and temperature, and what happened to grass in winter, and whether birds got cold, and where they went to sleep. She stood at the top of the ridge, and looked at the horizon, and listened to her employer and his son have a conversation about frost, and she felt the full size of what that was. Not dramatic, not performed. Just 2 people talking about something ordinary, in a specific place, on a specific cold morning, which was all conversation ever was, and which was also everything. On the way down, Elias took both their hands. He reached out without asking, without hesitating, without consideration of whether it was wanted. He simply held on. The 3 of them went down the winter hill slowly, Elias between them, the house below, and the bare trees along the drive, and the stone wall of the garden, and, very small from this distance but visible, the gate. She could not see the sparrow from here, but she knew it was there, or would be there. That was one of the things she counted on now. They ate lunch at home, and Elias told his father about frost crystals in considerable detail. After lunch, he went to the back room to draw. She could hear the crayon from the kitchen. She was at the sink when Raiden came to stand beside her. "I am sure now," he said. She turned off the water. She turned. He was entirely open, no management, no composure as armor. Just himself, settled and certain and completely present. "I know what I feel," he said. "I have known for some time. I wanted to be certain first, and I am." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I want to say it properly," he said. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. She was quiet. "I am in love with you," he said. Like a fact. Like something that had earned the right to be simply stated. She breathed in. She breathed out. "I love you," she said, plainly, like a fact of her own. "I have been holding that carefully for a while." "I know," he said. He reached out and took her hand. She held back. From the back room, Elias's crayon moved steadily across the page, the sound she had come to love above almost everything. And then, as if on cue, the sparrow landed on the garden gate, Elias's footsteps, and then all three of them at the window, and the boy's voice. It came back. "Yes," Raiden said. "It did. It always comes back," Elias said, sure and complete, the full stop at the end of a long, patient sentence. "Yes," she said, "it always does." Elias went back to drawing. They stood at the window, hand in hand, and the sparrow sat on the gate in the last light of the year, and the year was ending, and everything was beginning, and the house was warm and full, and the crayon moved and moved and moved. That was the whole story, all of it true, and it did not need anything more than what it was. After lunch, when the house had settled back into its afternoon quiet, and Elias was in the back room drawing, and the soup bowls were clean, and the kitchen was orderly, she stood at the window and looked at the garden. The gate was empty. The wall was pale in the winter light. The field beyond was silver and very still. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. She had been in this house for 3 months. 3 months, and a child who had spoken one word consistently had spoken 7 in a single sentence. 3 months, and a man who had not been able to come to breakfast had started coming to breakfast every day. 3 months, and a house that had the quality of a place that was maintaining itself under pressure had acquired something different, something better, the quality of a place that was being lived in, that had people in it who were where they wanted to be. She thought about the train ride up, the file in her bag, the contract in her pocket. She thought about the silence she had felt when she walked through the iron gate, the quality of it, the forced quality, the held-back quality, the silence of a place that was waiting for something it did not know how to ask for. It was not that silence now. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they are full, the specific quiet of a place where the important things are attended to, and the unnecessary things have been set aside. She was still at the window when Raiden came to stand beside her, not because he had something to say, simply because that was where she was, and that was where he wanted to be. They stood at the window and looked at the garden, and neither of them spoke, and it was entirely comfortable, and it had been exactly this comfortable for several weeks now. This specific standing together in silence, that was not the absence of conversation, but the presence of something that did not need conversation to be real. He reached out and took her hand. She held his. From the back room, the crayon moved across the page. Outside on the gate, the sparrow landed. Elias's footsteps came through the hallway. He appeared in the doorway. He looked at the gate. He said, "It came back." He always said what was true. That was the thing she had understood about him from the beginning, and that had turned out to be the most important thing. He always said what was true, in whatever way was available to him. When he had no words, he said it in drawings and in cups pushed across tables and in sweaters taken from chairs. When he had words, he said it plainly, without decoration. "The bird is gone. Come back. Morning. More. Sarah. Bird looks right. This is very good today. I think the bird is coming back. It always comes back." All of it true. Every word of it. "Yes," she said. "It always does." And she held Raiden's hand, and the crayon moved, and the sparrow sat on the gate, in the last light of the year, and the year was ending, and the spring was coming, and this was the whole of the story, and it was enough. The sister arrived 2 days before Christmas, in a car she drove herself, somewhat faster than the driveway really permitted, and she came through the front door, carrying a bag in one hand, with her daughter Penny on the other side, and her husband Owen 2 steps behind with all the luggage, which he seemed to find entirely reasonable. Claire Voss was warm and direct, and noticed everything, and she walked through the front door and looked at the drawings pinned low on the wall, and said, "Those are extraordinary," without being told whose they were, and then she said, "You must be Sarah," and shook her hand with the firmness of someone who had already decided, before arriving, that she was going to like her. Owen was a quiet man, with an easy manner, who assessed the kitchen's resources within the first 10 minutes, and was making tea for everyone without being asked within 15. Penny was 8 years old, and had her mother's way of filling a room, and her father's quality of looking carefully at things before doing anything about them, and she stood in the front hallway, and looked around at everything with wide and interested eyes. Sarah had expected Elias to withdraw, and he did, appearing at the edge of the kitchen doorway once in the first hour, looking at the new people, and retreating. She let him observe from a distance, and did not draw attention to it. This was how he processed the unfamiliar, and rushing it would not help. Penny found him on her second visit to the kitchen. He was at the table with his paper and crayons. She sat at the other end without being invited, looked at his drawing without commenting on it immediately, and then after a while said, "What is that?" He looked at her. He looked at the drawing. "Bird," he said. "It looks like a real bird," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he pushed a blank piece of paper and a crayon across the table to her. She took both without ceremony, and started drawing. They worked together for 40 minutes, without exchanging another word, and when Penny's bird was done, she showed it to Elias, and he looked at it with complete seriousness, and said, "Good." And she beamed, and immediately began drawing another one. Sarah watched from across the kitchen. She caught Mrs. Pryor's eye. Mrs. Pryor made a very controlled expression, and turned back to the counter with the composure of a woman who had seen a great deal, and was not going to make a fuss about any of it. Claire found Sarah in the kitchen the next morning. She came in with her coffee, and sat at the table without any preamble, and said, "You've changed things here." "Elias has changed things," Sarah said. "Both true," Claire said, without hesitation. "Raiden called us about a month ago. He almost never calls. He talked for 40 minutes, which is also almost never. He didn't say your name, but he talked about the house. He said it felt like itself again. He hadn't said anything like that in 2 years. Sarah held her cup. "He is going to be all right," Claire said. It had the quality of something said as much to herself as to the person across the table. Something said because it had been waiting a long time for a moment where it could be said. "Yes," Sarah said. "He is." Claire looked at her. Her eyes were very bright. "Are you going to stay?" she asked, direct and complete. Sarah considered it honestly. "I think so," she said. Claire nodded. "Good." She picked up her coffee and walked out. Christmas Eve was quiet and full, in the way days are quiet when they are filled with the right things. Elias and Penny drew all afternoon and fell asleep in front of the sitting room fire. Owen read. Claire organized the kitchen in a way that Mrs. Pryor allowed after the first hour of silent negotiation. Raiden and Sarah were in the hallway at the same time, both reaching for coats, and the hallway was narrow. "How are you?" he asked. "The real version." "Good," she said. "I like your family." "They like you." He paused. "Claire told me she spoke with you." "Briefly." "She doesn't do brief." "No," she agreed. "She really doesn't." He looked at her in the narrow hallway with the lamplight, and outside the first real snow of December, coming down through the dark. "I am still making sure," he said quietly, "still getting it right." "I know," she said. "It will not be much longer," he said. She held his gaze. "I know," she said again. He reached past her for his coat and went out into the snow. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went to the sitting room. Elias had woken up. He was drawing again. A house. This specific house, with the tall windows, and the stone wall at the back, and the gate. She sat beside him. "Is that this house?" she asked. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Our house," he said. She held very still. "Yes," she said. "It is." He added a bird to the drawing. On the gate, small and precise, wings folded close, head slightly turned, sitting exactly the way the sparrow always sat. She watched his hand move and let herself feel the full weight of our house, the word our, the inclusion of her in it, the simple and complete certainty with which he had said it. He had drawn her into the belonging of this place, with the same intention he brought to everything he drew. She let herself feel it. This was allowed, it was real, and it was allowed. Outside, snow was falling on the garden and the wall and the gate, and Raiden's footsteps moved across the gravel in the dark, and the house was warm and lit from inside, and in the drawing, a bird sat exactly where it was supposed to be, patient and precise, and precisely right. The drive to the ridge on the 30th had a quality she would remember afterward as one of the most particular hours she had spent in that house. Not dramatic, not heavy, just specific and real, the way hours are when the people in them are completely themselves and have nowhere to be other than exactly where they are. Elias named things out the window all the way there, and Raiden drove, and she looked at the winter landscape and thought about how much had changed since October. Not the landscape. The hills were the same hills, the walls the same walls, the gray sky the same gray sky. But the quality of being in the car with these two people had changed entirely. In October, sitting in a car with both of them would have been a careful and navigated thing, full of silences that needed to be managed. Now the silences were just silences. The naming was just naming. The drive was just a drive, which was to say it was what it had always been, which was a morning, a car, 3 people, the world going past. At the top of the ridge, with the wind in their faces, and the silver land spread out below them, and the sky very close and pale overhead, she had felt the size of the thing they were all 3 part of. Not dramatically. It was not a dramatic feeling. It was the quiet kind of enormousness, the kind that arrives when you have been paying very close attention to something small for a very long time, and then you step back and see the whole of it. She looked at the winter horizon and listened to Raiden and Elias talk about frost, and she felt quietly certain of several things she had been less certain of in October. That this house was where she was supposed to be. That the people in it had become her people, in the specific and particular way that that word means when it is true. That the year ending was not an ending but a turn, the way a path turns at the top of a ridge and you see the way forward opening out. Elias had taken both their hands on the way down the hill, and she had held his hand, and Raiden had held his other hand, and they had gone down the winter path slowly, the 3 of them, and the house had been below in the valley with its lit windows and its familiar shape, and she had thought, that is where we are going, that is where we live. Both things were true, and she let both things be true. When they got home, Raiden made soup, and Elias told him about frost crystals, and she sat at the table and listened, and after lunch, Elias went to the back room to draw, and she was at the sink, when Raiden came to stand beside her and said, I am sure now. She turned off the water, she turned. He said what he said, she said what she said. He reached for her hand and she held it. The crayon moved in the back room. The sparrow landed on the gate. And Elias came to the window and looked at the bird and said, it always comes back. Yes, she said, it always does. That was the truth. And it was sufficient. The whole of it, every word of it, completely sufficient. Claire and Owen and Penny left on the morning of the 31st, in a swirl of goodbyes, and Penny's commentary on what she and Elias should draw next time, and Owen's quiet efficiency with the bags. Claire hugged Sarah at the door and said, low and direct, it's right, you know. All of it, it's right. I know, Sarah said. Good, Claire said, and got in the car. After they left, the house had the particular quality of a space that has been full and is now returning to its natural state. Not emptied, but restored. The Voss household, in its Voss configuration, which was the one it had been building toward since October. The 3 of them, in the warm house, in the December morning. Elias drew for the whole morning. She could hear the crayon. Raiden worked in his office, or sat in the kitchen, or stood at the window looking at the garden with the expression of a man who is waiting for something and knows the wait is nearly over. She made lunch. They ate. Elias asked to go to the ridge. She had known he was going to ask. She had known it since the drawing. The 3 figures on the ridge, the house below, the bird on the gate. He had been drawing the plan for weeks. He was simply executing it now. They went. They drove through the winter landscape and climbed the winter path and stood at the top of the wide winter world, and Elias took both their hands on the way down, and when they came home, Raiden made soup, and Elias talked about Frost. She was at the sink when Raiden came to stand beside her and said, "I am sure now." She had been waiting for those words for a long time. Not with impatience, she was not an impatient person, but with the specific quality of certainty she had described to him, the knowledge that builds from evidence and becomes simply true. She was certain. She had been certain for a while. She had been waiting for him to be certain too, because that was the right way to do it, and he had needed the time, and she had given it. Now he was certain, and he said so, and she said what she had been holding. The kitchen was warm. The house was full. Outside the window the year was ending in the quiet and particular way of days that matter, without drama, without announcement, in the ordinary light of a December afternoon, in a place that had become home. The sparrow landed on the gate. Elias came to the window. "It always comes back," he said. "Yes," she said, "it always does." That was the whole of it, all 10 parts of the story, from the silence at the iron gate to the sparrow on the gate at the end of the year. A child who spoke one word, a caregiver who tried to be worth waiting for, a father who learned to stop finding reasons not to be somewhere he wanted to be. All of it true, all of it enough. The year's last morning was ordinary in the best sense. She was downstairs early, the kitchen lamp on against the dark December dawn. She made the oatmeal and cut the toast in rectangles and set the table for 3. Elias came down in his red sweater, fully dressed, ready. He ate his breakfast with the focused efficiency of a child who had somewhere to be. When Raiden came downstairs, Elias looked up immediately and asked to go to the ridge, and Raiden said yes, and she said yes, and that was the whole of the decision. They went. At the top of the ridge, with the last day of December spread out around them, and the winter world silver and enormous in every direction, Elias stood for a long time, looking at everything, before he said anything. She had come to love this quality in him, this willingness to take the time to really look before using words, to be certain that the words he chose were the right ones for the thing he was describing. He turned in his slow circle. He looked at his father. He looked at her. "This is ours too," he said. 4 words, not a question. Raiden looked at his son. He looked at the ridge and the sky and the wide silver land. "Yes," he said, "it is." Elias nodded, satisfied, and crouched down to look at the frost. She stood at the top of the ridge and felt the wind and looked at the horizon and thought, "This is ours too. Yes, it is." The house below, with its stone wall and its gate, and the field beyond. The path they had come up and would go down. The kitchen with the lamp and the oatmeal and the drawings on the shelf, the evenings and the mornings, and the space between them where everything important had been built, one small and careful thing at a time. This is ours. Yes, it is. They went down the hill, Elias between them, both their hands held, one careful step at a time, the house below and the year ending and everything ready to begin. The last day of December arrived gray and cold, and wearing completely ordinary clothes. The important days, she had learned over the years, rarely announced themselves. They showed up looking like any other day. They only became visible as important afterward, from the other side, looking back. She was in the kitchen at 7:15, when Elias came downstairs. He was fully dressed, clothes, combed hair, the red sweater. He came to the table and looked at her directly. "Today I want to go to the ridge," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Does your dad know?" she asked. He shook his head. "Then we should ask him," she said. He nodded. He ate his breakfast with the focused efficiency of a child who has somewhere specific to be, and when Raiden came downstairs, Elias looked up immediately and said, "Can we go to the ridge today?" Raiden stopped in the doorway. He looked at his son. He looked at Sarah, briefly, and she kept her eyes on her book, because this belonged to the 2 of them. "Yes," Raiden said, "we can go today." He looked at Sarah. "Will you come?" "Yes," she said. They drove to the base of the North Ridge after breakfast, all 3 of them, Elias in the back with his window open a crack against the cold. He named things as they drove past them. Tree, fence, brown field, snow on that hill. A quiet running commentary, addressed to no one specifically. Both adults listened without commenting. The naming was complete in itself. The path was clear at the base, and icy in spots further up. Raiden walked close to Elias without taking his hand, the specific proximity of a father who has learned the difference between hovering and being present. She walked on the other side. They went up slowly, stopping when Elias stopped, which was often. At a flat place about a third of the way up, there was a view back toward the estate, the house in the middle distance, the trees along the drive, the stone wall of the garden, the field. Elias stopped and looked at it for a long time. "Our house," he said. "Yes," Raiden said. Elias turned to look at his father. "Mum liked it here," he said. "You told me." Raiden crouched down to Elias's height. He took a moment. "Yes," he said. "She did. She loved this path." Elias looked at the house in the valley. "She is not here now." "No," Raiden said, "she is not." Elias looked at his father. "But we are," he said. The silence after that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Yes," Raiden said, "we are." Elias turned and continued up the path. Raiden stood. She saw him press his hand flat against his leg for a moment, the same contained gesture she had seen in the kitchen in October, and then it released, and he walked. She walked beside him. They reached the top of the ridge 20 minutes later. The view was exactly what he had described during the storm, wide and open and complete, the territory stretching out in all directions, the sky close and pale gray, the winter grass silver in the cold, nothing between them and the horizon but air and light. Elias stood at the top and turned in a slow full circle. "Big," he said. "Yes," Raiden said. Elias turned to Sarah. His expression was serious and expectant. "Do you like it?" he asked. She looked at the wide gray sky, and the silver land, and the whole enormous winter morning. "Very much," she said. He nodded, satisfied. He crouched down to look at the frost crystals in the grass, and Raiden crouched beside him, and they examined the same small patch of ground together, and Elias asked questions about frost and temperature, and whether it hurt the grass, and Raiden answered each one, and the conversation went on for several minutes. Careful questions, thoughtful answers, and it was entirely ordinary, and entirely extraordinary at the same time. She stood and looked at the horizon. On the way back down the path, Elias reached out on either side and took both their hands. He did it without asking, without pausing, without any visible consideration of whether it was all right. He simply reached out and held. It was the first time in all her weeks in this house that he had initiated physical contact with either of them. She held his hand. Raiden held his other hand. They went down the hill slowly and carefully, Elias between them, the winter land spread out in all directions, the house waiting below. Raiden made soup when they got back. Elias told him in considerable detail about the frost crystals at the top of the ridge, while Raiden listened with the kind of attention that does not wander. And after lunch, Elias went to the back room, and she could hear his crayon from the kitchen. She was at the sink when Raiden came to stand beside her. "I am sure now," he said. She turned off the tap. She turned to face him. He was not managing anything. He was not performing anything. He was standing in his kitchen on the last day of December, looking at her, with his face completely open. "I know what I feel," he said. "I have known for some time. I waited until I was certain, because I wanted to be certain, and I am." He paused. "It is right." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I want to say it properly. You don't have to say it any particular way." "I want to," he said. She was quiet. "I am in love with you," he said, like a statement of settled fact. Like something that had been true long enough to be simply true, without needing to be argued for or defended. "I did not plan for it. I was not certain I was ready, or that it was fair. But it has been 3 months, and it has not become smaller. It has become larger every day, and I know my own mind, and this is what is in it." She breathed in. She breathed out. She felt the full size of it and held it. "I have been very careful," she said. "I know. I held on to the shape of things, the way things were supposed to be. I know that too. And then the shape changed," she said, slowly. "And I let it change, because I knew what it was changing into, and I have known for quite some time." He watched her. "I love you," she said. plainly, without anything extra. I have been holding that for a while. I know, he said. You know? You were careful, he said, but you are not invisible. She looked at him, and something in her chest released, a long and slow letting go of a breath she had been holding since October. No, she said, I suppose I am not. He reached out and took her hand, not quickly, not urgently. The way you reach for something you have waited a long time to hold, and now hold gently, because you understand its value. She held back. They stood in the kitchen like that, quiet, not saying anything else, because everything important had been said, and the rest would come in its own time, in the steady daily way of things that are real. From the back room, Elias's crayon moved across the page, steady and sure, the sound she had come to love more than almost any other sound in this house, the sound of a child who had decided the world was worth drawing. Outside the kitchen window, the year was nearly done. The garden was still. The stone wall was pale in the winter light. The gate was empty. And then, as if it had been waiting, as if it had known, the sparrow landed on the gate, exactly where it always landed, gray and small and precise, its wings folded close, its head turned slightly toward the window. She saw it first. Look, she said. Raydan looked. Bird, she said. Not for any purpose beyond the fact that it was there and it was worth naming. Bird, he said. From the back room, small footsteps. Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway with his red crayon still in his hand, walked to the window and stood beside them, and looked out. He saw the sparrow. He regarded it with the complete seriousness he brought to everything important. Then he turned his face up to both of them. It came back, he said. Raydan looked down at his son. His face was entirely without armor, completely open, full of something that did not need a name, because they were all three standing inside it. Yes, Raydan said. It did. It always comes back, Elias said. Not a question. A declaration. A 6-year-old standing in his kitchen at the end of December, between his father and the woman he had named into his house, looking at a bird on a gate, and telling them something he knew to be absolutely true. Yes, Sarah said, it always does. Elias looked at the bird a moment longer. Then he turned, satisfied, and went back to his drawing. She and Raydan stood at the window with their hands together and watched the sparrow on the gate in the last afternoon light of the year. It was unhurried and settled and certain of where it was, as if it had decided long ago that this gate in this garden belonging to this house was exactly the right place. Then it opened its wings and flew. The gate was empty. The year was ending. The garden was still. But spring was months away, and it was coming, the way it always came, the way everything comes back, when the conditions are right, and someone decides to wait, and someone else decides to stay. Elias's crayon moved in the back room, drawing whatever he was drawing. She did not know yet what it was, but she knew she would see it before long, because he brought his drawings to show her now, every one of them, the way you share things with someone who has become part of your house, part of your morning, part of the belonging that makes a place a home. Raydan's hand was in hers. The kitchen was warm and full and lit from within. Somewhere beyond the wall the last light of December was going gold at the edge of the field, and somewhere beyond the south a sparrow was flying toward warmth, and somewhere beyond the winter the same sparrow would turn, the way sparrows do, and come back. It always did. That was the whole story, all of it true, and it did not need anything more than what it was. She thought, afterward, in the spring, when the heather was starting to come back on the North Ridge, and Elias had 743 words, that she had stopped counting, because the counting was no longer the point. She thought about what she would say, if anyone asked her how it had happened. How a child who spoke one word had learned to speak in sentences. How a house that was quiet in the wrong way had become quiet in the right way. How a man who had been carrying something alone for 2 years had set some of it down. She thought she would say, I tried to be worth waiting for. That was all. I decided that was the only thing that mattered, and I held to it, and everything else followed from that. She thought she would say, he did the work. The child did the work. Every single day, in the only way available to him, he chose to keep trying. He chose to give the next word to the world, even when the world had not always received his words well. That took more courage than she could quantify, and it was entirely his. She thought she would say, "The house knew. Houses know these things." She had learned. They hold the quality of what happens in them, and when the quality changes, you can feel it, in the air, in the specific weight of the silence, in the way the rooms respond to the people moving through them. This house had known something was possible. It had been holding that knowledge for a very long time. It had just needed the right conditions. Safety. Consistency. Someone who decided to stay and then stayed. She thought she might say, "Love does not announce itself. It builds in the space between one person and another, in the small negotiations, in the ordinary mornings and the cups of tea, and the drawings left in places where they will be found. It builds slowly and honestly, and without performance, and one day you are in a kitchen with your hands in the sink, and the person you love is standing beside you, and you both already know, and there is nothing left to do but say it." She thought she would say all of these things, but mostly she thought she would not say anything at all. Mostly she thought she would just point to the three of them on the North Ridge in the spring, with the heather coming back and the view opening wide in all directions, and Elias explaining to his father, in considerable and accurate detail, the difference between the types of frost formations he had observed over the winter. She would point to that, and she would say, "There, that. That is how it happened." That was the answer. That was all of it. Complete and true and entirely sufficient. The sparrow was on the gate every morning. She counted on it, and it was always there, and that was the whole of what she had ever needed to know. She had come to this house to do a job. She had done the job, and she had also, entirely separately, entirely honestly, in the slow and patient way of things that do not hurry, become part of the household she had been hired to serve. Not as a professional arrangement, as a person who belonged. This was not something she had planned. It was not something she had prevented. It was something that had happened in the way that true things happen, gradually, and then all at once, and then simply as a fact of the world. Elias knew it first. He had always known it, probably. He was a child who paid attention, and he had been paying attention from the beginning. From the first afternoon when she stood at the window of the back room, and watched the sparrow on the wall, and he drew his bird, and neither of them said anything, and it was not wrong. He had known before she did. He had drawn her into his belonging, long before she had let herself know she was there. Raiden had been more careful about knowing it. He was a careful man, as she had understood from the first morning, and he had been careful about this too. Not because he did not feel it, but because he felt it clearly enough to know it deserved the right treatment. To know that it needed to be certain before it was said. To know that the saying of it would change things, and that things changed by this particular kind of saying did not go back. He had been right to be careful. She had been right to wait. The waiting had made it stronger. Now it was said, and the year was ending, and the sparrow was on the gate, and Elias was drawing in the back room with the steady industry of a child who has decided the world is worth describing, and who will spend the rest of his life proving it. She stood in the kitchen with Raiden's hand in hers, and looked out the window at the sparrow and thought, "This is the whole of it. This is what I came here for, even though I did not know it. This quiet and particular fullness. This home." The sparrow flew. The gate was empty. The year was done. And everything, all of it, every small, careful, patient thing, was beginning.